Okay, everybody, we are live. Hello and welcome to Angular Contributor Days 2018. Super excited to have everybody here. Just giving you an idea of what is going on. So let me go ahead and share my screen really quickly. And again, welcome everybody. Can everyone see my screen? Hopefully. There we go. All right. Everyone good? Yep. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Carmen. Okay, so Angular Contributor Days. This was, we started doing these last year in an effort to make open source a little bit more open. So we've been partnering with a lot of amazing core teams and putting together these awesome contributor days. So this is created in partnership with the Angular core team, and what it really is trying to do is provide this open discussion of, hey, what's going on in Angular? You know, if you're new to it, or if you're using Angular, or if you're contributing, how do we all help each other and create a more open environment for everybody to thrive and for Angular to be successful? So, Stephen, do you want to say anything about this as well?
Yeah, I mean, reflecting back to last year, which was kind of our inaugural one, we started with this idea of bringing a bunch of contributors together, all live and in the same place. And the Angular community kind of doesn't scale in one place, kind of in the physical realm. And so this year we had to bring it online because we wanted to share faster, we wanted to share more broadly, and we wanted to invite more people into the conversation. So I think the Angular team is very happy to be celebrating contributors and to be hearing from so many people that are part of our ecosystem.
Yes. And again, remember, there are a ton of people on the chat. We probably have about 20 or 30 or so people on the chat, or speakers, contributors, meetup organizers, et cetera, et cetera. So feel free to join that chat. Feel free to talk to those people. Feel free to ask as many questions as possible. But you really do have a lot of really amazing people from the Angular community who are leading the Angular community here today. And in addition to that, we want everybody, again, you know, one of the reasons why we do contributor days is because we want everybody to feel like they can contribute to the community as well, and they can be a part of the community. If you're just using Angular or getting started. So giving you an idea of the agenda, we're going to try our best to keep to this agenda. Things might deviate just a little bit, but we talked about why contributor days. I'm overviewing the agenda right now. We're going to be doing a few quick introductions in just a second. Then Stephen and the rest of the team will be giving a state of the world Angular. Then we'll be doing a quick AMA with the Angular core team. We'll have Stephen, Hans, and Igor as well, and Carmen will be leading that AMA/Q&A. So again, feel free to add your questions to the chat. Then we sort of have divided this into 3 sections in which we believe is, you know, interesting parts of the ecosystem. There's obviously a ton more, and we're so sorry we weren't able to include everybody. But the first thing we're going to be talking about is education and training, which was a very big topic at the last contributor days. So we'll be having Angular Bootcamp and Thinkster talk about that, and then 30 minutes of Q&A and conversation around that. Then we'll be talking about consulting as well. We'll have Nrwl, Rangle, Thisdot, and Valor talk about what they do to help provide consulting services to the ecosystem, and Q&A around that as well. And then we've chosen a few different library authors to present today: NativeScript, StoryBook, NgRx, Codelyzer, Clarity, and Compodoc. So that being said, myself, Igor, Hans, and Stephen will be kind of leading, hopefully, the discussions around the things related to contributor days today. Igor, Stephen, and Hans are on the Angular core team. Stephen, do you want to say a little bit more about this?
No, I think, yeah, we're actually going to try and shut up and listen and kind of hear from everybody else today too.
Cool, awesome. And then the people who will actually be presenting, we have quite a few people presenting today on the different topics that I just went through. Very excited again to have Carmen leading the Q&A, and a bunch of these faces and names have been very active in the speaker community. So, and then Nick is being replaced by Andrew, I believe. So, contributors as well. So here are some of the folks that you will be seeing on the live chat. I believe a lot of them have already introduced themselves. But again, you have the speakers on live chat if you want to talk to any of them. And then you have the contributors on live chat as well. And, you know, these again are great, amazing people in the Angular community that are absolutely willing to help you get more involved. So thank you everybody for joining. Special thanks to some community meetups, Atlanta AngularJS, Angular SF, Rocky Mountain Angular, and Sacramento Angular for getting the word out, as well as a ton of others. And then without further ado, I think I'll go ahead and hand it off to Stephen to talk about the state of the world Angular.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through a brief update about kind of the state of the world of Angular, but I'm going to do this entirely through the lens of the community, because one of the things that we think about when we're talking about contributors and the ecosystem in the community is really all about how it's kind of funny where a lot of people don't know that this community exists. And so having a chance to reflect and celebrate that community is a really big deal to us. So again, I'll kind of go through this very quick, and then we'll do our AMA here. So I always like to start with the Angular team values, because this is a lot of how we approach problems. It's a lot of how we approach the community. And so it really informs kind of everything that we do. So the first value we have is apps that users love to use. And so at the end of the day, when we're building software, we're always doing it for some sort of user, right? We're trying to create value. We're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to make users more effective at doing something or feeling connected or being part of something. And we always want to keep that in mind, because when we're building software, it's very easy to forget the users. It's easy to think about our high-speed connections and our super powerful machines. But by grounding ourselves in users and worrying about things like performance, experience, this makes sure that not only are we going to be more successful as developers, but we're going to make our users successful, which is kind of what makes society run. But then also when it comes to Angular, I mean, we are a set of tools. We are a platform for building software. And so developer experience is also really critical to us. And so we're always looking for ways of making developers kind of both more effective, so being able to get more done with less time through automation, through really great tooling. But then also, how do we help developers go further? How do we help them further their skill sets? One of my favorite things that I've heard in my time on the Angular team is actually that a bunch of developers feel like Angular has made them a better developer because we push them into doing things like reactive programming or TypeScript. But even with those two things, that's not enough. We really rely on a huge and awesome community, which is kind of why we're here today, which is the Angular team values a community where everyone feels welcome. And this is kind of core to everything we do. Whenever we start a meetup or an event, we always talk about code of conduct. We talk about how we want to treat each other with respect, how we want to create an atmosphere of collaboration and positivity. And so I think this is actually a huge part of why we've been successful. It's a huge part of why so many people were participating in the AngularJS community a few years ago, and why Angular is being so successful today. And so I'm going to kind of go through a lot of things that some of the more advanced Angular developers may have heard before. But as I'm going through all this content, I want to reflect on this idea that a lot of what the team has been doing for the last few months, and a lot of what the team is going to be doing over the next few months, is really focused almost more so than the first 2 points on that third point, a community where everyone feels welcome. So I'm going to go through this in just 3 sections. First, I'll talk about kind of the growth and kind of where the community's been headed recently. I'll talk about some of the most recent releases that we've made as a team. And then I'll just touch briefly on some of what's coming in the future. So let's start off with community. So we've really definitely seen a huge amount of community growth. As of last year, we had 1,000 30-day actives, or excuse me, 1,000,000 30-day actives to the Angular.io website. And the reason we use 30-day actives to the Angular.io website is because Angular is both open source, and then used at so many companies kind of privately behind the firewall, it's very hard to tell how many people are using Angular. You can't use things like NPM downloads because a lot of people have NPM proxies, third-party repositories, artifactory systems, all these things in place. And so there's not a lot of great metrics, but what we can use is our own doc site as kind of a lower bound of how many developers are actively participating in the ecosystem, actively learning new things with Angular. And so we were really excited to pass 1 million 30-day actives as of last year. And as of earlier this year, we actually reached 1.25 million 30-day actives. And so we're seeing a huge amount of growth in terms of the both adoption of Angular as well as the growth of the community, because a lot of the people that come to the site aren't just building Angular applications. As we're going to hear a lot today, they're giving back to that community. And so that's something that we're very excited about. We're also very lucky that there's a huge amount of people that want to share and explore their passion with others. And so on Meetup alone, there's more than 790 different meetups across the world. So basically, anytime I'm traveling, I always just Google location X meetup or Angular meetup, and there's almost always somewhere a meetup happening really nearby, which is a really great way to get connected to different communities. And I still run into people who are like, there's communities, there's a Angular Boston community, and they're like, oh, I didn't even know that, I should get involved. And so that's always exciting to see people creating new connections and kind of finding new teams and collaborations. I also want to call out a really awesome community project, NgRx. So this is a effort to train Angular developers. We had a really awesome one in Mountain View earlier this month. There's awesome ones happening all over the globe. And so I know that organization is actually looking for more volunteers, more mentors, and people that want to grow and expand this idea of providing free training in Angular. The other really thing that's exciting about community when it comes to Angular is that new things pop up every day, and none of it is with our permission. None of it requires our permission. None of it is actually, a lot of it we find out in the same way that developers do, right? Twitter, Reddit, threads, Stack Overflow posts, all these sorts of things. And so we're always delighted at kind of the number and the amount of innovations that are happening. I know just last week I started seeing a brand new, I think it was a blog post that someone's writing where every 30 days they're collecting the best Angular content and then redistributing that. And I'm showing here on the screen a tool that Wasim is working called X Layers that basically creates an interaction between sketch files and Angular components in a really interesting way. So I am definitely excited to see every day what the new community is going to come up with, because we can't predict it. It's kind of growing beyond any of our imaginations. So now I'm going to jump into some of the recent updates. So we had a 6.0 release of Angular. We're working towards 6.1 of the CLI. So all these kind of incremental updates are coming. But I want to reflect on some of these things, not just on the features, but I want to look at these things as efforts that the Angular team is taking on to support community. And so we always talk about this idea of balancing stability and innovation. And so one of the big challenges that we have to take on is how do you build Angular out, and how do you evolve Angular in a way that allows developers to continue using their skill sets and continue using their knowledge, but then also offer to them the latest innovations from across the web, right? The ecosystem, the JavaScript ecosystem as a whole is moving very fast. The best practices are changing. The browsers are changing. And so we want to empower developers to take advantage of these things without having to sacrifice the things they already know. And so not only is this a challenge for us, but this is a challenge for all the libraries that are contributing to the ecosystem. And it's a problem for kind of anyone that's working in JavaScript. And so the Angular team, we decided to take on some of these challenges. And so as part of our most recent major release, we've actually created a bunch of tools that help developers with these sorts of problems. So one of the tools that we created, even over the last year or so, is called schematics. And so schematics is basically a tool that you can build as a developer. It's in some ways Angular agnostic, but we're using it heavily in Angular. That it's an open platform for modifying projects. So you'll already see this in the Angular ecosystem with things like ngNew, where you take an empty file system and you give back a fully scaffolded application that's ready to be built and run. You also see this with ngGenerate, And we're bringing schematics to a few new places to kind of expand the ecosystem and to expand this idea of empowering both developers and library and community contributors to cooperate more effectively. And so the first way we're doing this is with ngupdate. So if you run ngupdate at angular/core, under the hood, we're going to use your package manager, so npm or yarn, to update the dependency. But we're also going to do a bunch of other steps that go beyond just dependency management into helping your application stay up to date. And so, for example, we have a concept called package groups. So we're not just going to update Angular core. We're going to update all of the necessary framework packages that exist as part of Angular. We're going to update all of the peer dependencies, which we use because it eliminates kind of duplicate versioning problems that a lot of developers see. So you'll get the latest version of RxJS, you'll get the correct version of Zone.js, you'll get the correct version of TypeScript. But as part of this, we're not only updating the dependencies, we're checking each of these packages that updates for an ngupdate schematic. And if we find one that matches the version that you're crossing over, then we're going to run code in that schematic to update your application to keep your project up to date. A great example of this is with RxJS, where we're actually installing RxJS compat so that the transition from 5.5 to 6, where there's a bunch of deprecations, it's much smoother, it's much cleaner, it's much simpler to understand what's going on. And this is a really big deal for us because we've built it in a way that's built based on the package managers and the publicly available repositories. So anyone that wants to can build something that takes advantage of ngupdate. So if you're shipping a component library, if you're shipping a set of tools, you can build ngupdate schematics that keep your projects up to date. We've already heard from a bunch of teams and a bunch of companies that are like, oh, this makes it easier for me to stay up to date with my developers because I can help them along the way. If I need to deprecate, if I need to rename something, I can help my developers do that and stay up to date. And so that's something really excited. We also created something called ngadd, which is a way of adding capabilities to an Angular application. So if you ng-new a new app, or if you take an existing app, you can ngadd at Angular/PWA, material elements, all these things to just add capabilities to your application. So not only does it, again, install the package manager dependency, but it also modifies your application to take advantage of that. So for example, if you ngadd at Angular/PWA, you're going to get a application manifest and you're going to get service worker, and that service worker is going to be added to your application and configured. If you do this with at Angular/elements, not only are you going to get the elements dependency, you're also going to go ahead and get the polyfill that makes that work inside of our build system. And again, I want to highlight the fact that this is open, right? Anyone in the world can do this. And so one of the things that we're looking at for the future is, hey, is there a way that the community or someone out there could be building an index of these things to improve discoverability? Because the package managers are really excellent for resolving these and allowing everyone to contribute in kind of an open marketplace, but it doesn't aid discovery that much. And so we're asking developers to put tags onto their packages like ngadd, ngupdate, to let us and others know, hey, my package is supporting these kind of newer capabilities to help developers move faster and stay up to date. We've also done a bunch of work on the component dev kit, which includes kind of both behaviors that developers need and solutions for common problems. So whether that's something like accessibility, whether that's something like building overlays, the component dev kit is really trying to take the best of what we put into Angular material and make it accessible for anyone that's building a component library. And so one of the new trends that we've seen in the last couple of updates is every time we create a new Angular material component, this styled material design version, we're also creating an unstyled version as part of the CDK. And so that's something that we want to continue expanding, because if we can help component authors go faster and already have accessibility out of the box, already have best practices out of the box, again, everyone's going to be more effective together. One of the things that we thought was really cool as part of the most recent release is that we, because when you ngadd at Angular/material, not only can we install the dependency, we can also install additional schematics. We've actually given developers now the power to install what we call starter components. And so previously you would have to install kind of each piece of material one by one by one. But now you can go ahead and create a dashboard or a table view or a navigation from material that already pre-configures and shows you how to use all these things. And this is a pattern that is enabled by schematics under the hood. And we really hope that a lot of other component authors are going to create their own starter components or their own starter utilities, again, to help show the best practices, to kind of guide and ease the learning journey for anyone using any package across the ecosystem. Angular Elements was something that we shipped as part of the 6.0 release as well. So you can take any Angular component now and package it as a custom element, which does bootstrapping via the native browser machinery, which is a really exciting technology. We've heard from a lot of developers that they're excited about this. In the future, we're going to be making it easier and possible to bundle your Angular elements as JavaScript that you can distribute to other teams. And again, this is really focused around how do you collaborate better? How do we leverage web standards and kind of allow developers to take advantage of their Angular skill set and participate in broader, richer ecosystems. One of the other changes we've made is that we've changed the configuration file format that we use for the CLI. And so now you kind of have a true workspace in the angular.json file. So you've got your workspace is broken down into a set of projects, and then a set of targets, and then each target can have a set of configurations. And this is actually really cool because one of the things that is now possible is that it's going to be possible is we have what are called builders that are specified as part of this workspace. And so when you have a target like build, the Angular CLI now is calling out to a separate file that actually knows how to do that build. And our intent for the future is to actually stabilize those APIs. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more, I think. One of the other side effects of the new angular.json format is that it's easier to have multiple projects in the same file system. And so you can take an Angular project, and then you can generate a library next to it. You can generate a Angular universal project next to it. And then this is going to automatically take advantage of a lot of the best practices. So when you generate a library, for example, we're leveraging a community open source contributor, David Hergis, who built ngPackager. And so we're using ngPackager under the hood as part of this as kind of one of the best practices for building Angular libraries that follow the package format that we think is going to work best for developers. So now I'm going to flash forward a little bit to the future, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. So I mentioned that the new angular.json workspace format has these builders. And so here you can see at angular-devkit/build angular:browser. Right now, we don't necessarily recommend trying to modify or change one of these builders, but we really think about the things that we did as part of 6.0 as the first step to making these configurable. So we want to lock down that API in the future so that other people can build their own builders. So if you want to use a custom Webpack config, or if you want to use Bazel, all these different options should be configurable by the users and by developers and by library authors, so that you can take advantage of Angular in more and different ways, which is something that we really care about. We've also announced a project called Angular for Designers, where we're looking at what are the various ways that we can make the collaboration between designers and developers easier, reduce the number of handoffs, as well as empower kind of higher fidelity in both directions. So this is something that we're still exploring and evaluating. And this is a place where even before we've written a single line of code for this, we wanted to open it up to the community to tell us what they need, to tell us what they care about, and to show us the tools that they're already building. Because in general, the more we can align with the community, the more successful everyone's going to be. Another project that we've talked a fair amount about is Ivy. And so in general, just a brief overview is we're rewriting the rendering pipeline in a backward compatible way. So we did this between version 2 and version 4. Not very many people noticed, except for generated code sizes got about 60% smaller. We're doing this again for a future release of Angular. And basically how I summarize this is previously you had the Angular renderer, which had all the features, pipes, dependency injection, all these sorts of capabilities, and it would refer out to your code. What we're doing in Ivy is we're actually inverting that so that your code, after it's been run through the compiler, is actually the thing that's making the references out to Angular capabilities. And by inverting this, we can take advantage of tree shaking, we can take advantage of code splitting much more effectively. But not only that, it's going to simplify the debugging model. So you can actually see where your HTML template is invoking different features of Angular. And so the overall architecture of the rendering pipeline in Angular is going to get much, much simpler. And we feel like this is actually not just great for users and great for developers. This is also going to open things up to the community more because historically our compiler was a little bit difficult to contribute to. It wasn't documented. It was rather complex. But the rendering pipeline in Ivy is going to be much more simpler, much more modularized, segmented. And so our hope is that because these connections are simpler and the architecture is a little bit easier, we are going to have more people contributing and solving problems. Ivy, as I said, just is not here yet. We're currently working on the runtime and the compiler. When that's ready, then we'll move into a more validation stage where we'll roll this out to early adopters, validate it across all the kind of Google projects that are running Angular. And then at some point in the future, we'll kind of flip that on for everyone, and everyone will get the benefits. So we're very excited about that future. So there's tons more I could be talking about, but I definitely wanted to get this section, keep it as short as possible, make sure that we're all just kind of on the same page, and really help people understand how we're aligning the features and the capabilities that we're building out to this idea of contributors, to collaborators, to this whole idea of building an ecosystem around Angular where everyone feels welcome and then everyone can be successful. So thank you for this portion. And now I think we'll move into the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I will go ahead and let Carmen take over and help supplement with some of the questions on the chat. So feel free to post the questions on the chat there. And we have Stephen and Hans, and also for everybody on the chat who are contributors or speakers, or for anybody on video, feel free to chime in as well.
So I just have a quick question. I'm just wondering regarding Ivy, because you described the roadmap. Is there something like a version where you think that this will ship? Or
no, I will not commit to any version.
Okay, yeah.
When it's ready, right?
When it's ready, yeah, that's fair enough. So there's somebody that's asking a question. I think it's also regarding Ivy. He's asking if a dev will be able to jump into the rendering and make changes, or will it be something like a black box?
Sure. So Hans, feel free to jump in. I think our plan is that other people it will be easier to contribute. Theoretically, you could build your own compiler, because what we'll be doing at some point in the future is standardizing the set of instructions that exist. So you could theoretically build your own compiler. The runtime, I mean, theoretically, you could build your own runtime so you swap out what the instructions are calling. I have not thought too much about that, but I think in general, this idea of openness and being able to allow developers to tinker with the internals more easily is definitely one of our design goals. I think Igor is joining in just a moment, so maybe we want to come back to that question too.
Yeah, sounds good. Another question is, what section of core Angular lib would you expect to code split or be able to tree shake?
Sure. So I think we've tried to break it down as granularly as possible. So everything from interpolation to pipes to directives to internationalization, all these things I believe could be code split. Oh, Igor just joined. Can you hear us, Igor?
Yep, I can. Hello.
So we just got the question of where do we expect the edges to be in Ivy that we could code split or tree shake along?
So Ivy creates seams within the framework itself. It doesn't change where the seams are in the application. In the application, you will be able to have seams at every component level.
Yeah, I think the question was around within the framework side of things.
So the render itself, currently you either get the whole thing or not. With Ivy, each feature will be available for code splitting, and you will be able to bring in a single feature or push it later to the later state of the application and lazy load it, or tree shake it completely. So for example, queries in Angular, if you don't use them or if you use them in a lazy loaded chunk of the application, it can be deferred or tree shaken.
Sounds good. I'm also curious a little bit about Angular elements, because I'm using them quite a bit. And I'm curious, like, what's missing from there, or what's coming up there? Like, is there some sort of a roadmap, or are there new features that need to like land?
Sure. So I'll take a first stab at this. So Angular Elements today works perfectly well within the context of an Angular application. So if you have an Angular injector, you can hand that to the create custom element method, which will then work. But you're basically embedding all of Angular into that, or you need all of Angular in order for that element to run. I see in the future that we're going to be building tools out that help you bundle a custom element. And then when you combine that with this concept of Ivy, you could bundle a custom element for distribution, where you could run that custom element, you could run that JavaScript in a context that maybe is for a developer that doesn't know Angular. Maybe it's just pure vanilla JS.
Yeah.
Can I add to that a little bit?
Sure.
So when we talk about elements, we talk about 3 stages of Angular elements. The first stage is using elements within an Angular application. That's what we have today. The second stage is using Angular elements outside of Angular application. So imagine you build a widget with a weather forecast, and you want to just drop it on page, or you have a tweet widget that you just want to drop anywhere. So that's the second stage. And that one is planned to come out right after Ivy is done, because it depends on all of the size reduction that comes with Ivy. And then the third stage is ability to create component suites, like material design components with elements. And that would come after the second stage.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds really good. Another question is, are you expecting developers to be able to write Ivy-generated code in the future? Whoa.
Depends on who you ask this question. It's one of the things that scares me, just because it will give us less freedom to make changes the way we can do it now. Like one of the reasons why we can roll out Ivy as a change that is not destructive to the whole ecosystem that we built over the years is that we still have a lot of control over how the code is generated. If somebody tries to create the generic code by hand, we will have less control. We are thinking about how we could still have compatibility layers, and there are some ideas about how to do that. So we're not ruling it out completely. It's just not something that we want to roll out as the first thing with Ivy.
Okay, I have another one. I think this is for Hans. Are schematics that were mentioned, are they Angular specific? And I think this was mentioned already that they're not, but maybe Hans, you want to take it.
Yeah, schematics is not an Angular-specific library in the sense that it just deals with files in general and projects, and how you define a project or a file system is really up to you. They are, however, made by the Angular team, and so if you have questions about, like, if some other team come up with a schematic and you have question about their schematic content instead of the schematic library, then you should go to them to fix it. But if you find bugs with schematics itself, then we'll be happy to fix those, because it will affect everybody, including us.
And I think we've seen some teams outside of the Angular community starting to adopt schematics. But yes, as Juan said, it's not a use case that we can spend a ton of time supporting unless it's something wrong with schematics.
I'm actually curious about that.
Oh, I've lost Carmen here. I don't know if anyone else has.
I lost Carmen. Sorry, Carmen, we lost you for a second. What was the question?
Oh, sorry. So the question is, since schematics is not Angular specific, like, what is the use case where I would be working on a non-Angular app where I would want to use schematics? Maybe it's a silly question, but I'm just curious.
Schematics, it's not a silly question at all. So schematics is a workflow library. And essentially, if you wanted to generate, like, for example, I think it's Nest.js or Next.js, I never remember properly the name, but they're basically a server framework that is inspired, Nest.js, yes. And so when you want to add like a new route, you can use their schematics directly. And this is all about workflow, essentially. So if you could create schematics for your own company, if you want to create or add something to a project that already exists, that is not necessarily Angular specific. So maybe some documentation, you have a documentation team, you could enable them to just get started really quickly with some early schematics, like, oh, create a new documentation page and add it to my documentation server automatically. And this is the kind of workflow that schematics can enable.
Yeah, okay, that's clear. Thank you. I think this is also for you, Hans, and Igor. This is from Jeff. Are there any plans to add support for Bazel in the CLI?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. We have an experimental proof of concept that is available for building. We're still wondering what that will look like for the user experience.
I have a question here. So the question is, can we still use Zone.js with Ivy?
Yeah. Ivy doesn't change anything about zones. One of the things that we're working on is making it possible to build Angular applications without zones, because especially if you want to get to the point where we have the stage 2 Angular elements that you can just drop into some other application, bringing zones with them would be detrimental and would be just too much overhead. So we are working on design for Angular applications without zones, where zones are optional. But that has nothing to do with Ivy. It's a separate effort.
Cool. I don't see any more questions here. I do have a question, though, and it ties into what you were talking about, Stephen, in the beginning. It ties into the building the community. So I'm very curious, when you measure all these things, like how the growth of the community, for instance, or the people that use Angular, what are the kinds of things that you measure? Like, what do you look at? What are your metrics?
Sure. So I'll say, because of the kind of fundamental problem I talked about a little bit earlier, all metrics are flawed. And so we try and take as broad a perspective as possible. And so that includes docs traffic. It includes growth of things like NPM downloads. It includes GitHub traffic. It includes relative traffic to different docs pages, seeing what developers are excited about. Involves us actually working with a lot of our GDEs. So we have a fantastic GDE program where we've kind of certified a bunch of experts out in the field who are working with building and using Angular every day. And we try and get a lot of feedback from them, and we try and listen a lot. And I mentioned this idea of all the meetups that we try and kind of attend whenever possible. A big reason we do that is so that we can listen, because while you can get a lot from metrics, there's something that's very, very interesting in going to a meetup and talking to 30 different developers who are at different stages, someone who's never touched Angular all the way to someone who has been with us since the alphas, and they all have different perspectives, different feelings. And so it's a lot of conversations, and then we try and kind of find archetypes, we try and find patterns, and we try and understand kind of both what does it look like for a developer that's been using Angular for 2 years, as well as what does it look like for an Angular or a developer that's coming from AngularJS, as well as what happens if you're going to be learning Angular next year. What should that experience be like for you next year?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I also want to add a little bit to this, because I know a couple of you, and I just want to say it again, that people should not be afraid to reach out to you and talk to you about, their experiences, because you're always listening. So I think that's very important that people remember, should always reach out.
Absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is actually to work with educator partners, some of which we're going to hear from today, and actually just like attend an Angular class. Like, so I'm probably not going to learn anything from the instructors, but I'm going to learn things from the students, right? I'm going to say, oh, that's an interesting way of thinking about that problem. Or, oh, like, I didn't know people would have that context. I wouldn't expect that. And so I love learning from people that are learning Angular, because there's always things we can do better.
It was really cool to do the NgGirls workshop, where we mentored 150 women in Mountain View that were just getting started with their engineering career, or had already some background in engineering but wanted to pick up web development and development with Angular. And just seeing how they approached building applications, and there were some people I worked with that for the first time ever they saw editor, and just seeing their reaction, like, okay, so I can type here and I see results in the browser, and seeing how they approach that and what kind of difficulties would they struggle with was quite mind-blowing, because we often just make all these assumptions like, oh, this is all clear, everybody understands this. But that's not really the case, because there are so many people coming to web development from the server side or from database development, or I had network engineers that were in the tech for a long time. This was their first programming experience. So all of the assumptions that we had about what, or at least I had about what developers know already, were completely invalidated with this fun experience. And it was really cool to see that.
And I think this actually reflects really interestingly on this fact that we're trying to move, or we've moved from being a framework where we're just this tool set for just these developers, into being more of a platform where we care about the entire end-to-end experience of how do you get into JavaScript? How do you learn about these things? What's the context you're bringing with you? What are the skill sets you're bringing with you? How do we teach you best practices? How do we help you from prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot? And so caring about all these things and having these conversations, it's always so enlightening. And I think it's, again, kind of part of why we've been successful is this idea that we're not just one piece of the pie, where we're trying to understand the context and be a great part of the ecosystem.
And from gathering all these experiences, and I'm particularly interested in this thing that you're mentioning, Stephen, that you're also drawing inspiration from people who are like barely getting started with JavaScript or web development in general. And so I'm curious, like, what kind of things do you take with you, or how does that materialize into the kind of things that you're building? Does that mean more beginner-friendly docs, or I'm very curious, like, where does that go?
Sure. I would say it drives a lot of the product development we do and a lot of the decisions we have to make. So we are constantly challenging, for example, the default set of things that we give someone as part of NgNew, right? When should we, what type of services should we be putting in there? Should we be using lazy loading out of the box? Should we be adding polyfills? Should we be adding tests? And so I would say that's one of the kind of key places that you're going to see that manifested. But then we're also looking across the ecosystem for awesome other things to kind of point people to, because we can't own the entire solution, but we can be a part of helping people find those sorts of things. And so, I mean, I would call out everyone on the call probably, but in particular, I'll call out like Stackblitz, where if a developer doesn't have to set up an IDE on their computer and they don't have to set up Node and NPM and Git and all these things, and they can just start touching an Angular app and seeing things live without having to go through any setup process, that's so kind of transformational for a lot of people that are getting started.
Also, ng update is a good example of where we took input from the community and turned it into something that changed how we use Angular. For a long time, we assumed that people just know how to use npm and yarn and update their packages and resolve conflicts and peer dependencies. But through talking to developers, we realized, oh, this is actually a big point of friction that prevents developers from staying up to date with Angular. And that's why we built ngupdate, that makes it a much simpler process that automates as much as we can and enables people to just stay with the latest version of Angular.
Yeah, that was freaking awesome.
And my hope is that it goes beyond just staying with the latest version of Angular to the latest version of the kind of society of JavaScript.
Yeah, that's really cool. I have used ngupdate and it was awesome. It's very, very cool. I have another question if I can still find it. Is there still time, Tracy?
Yeah, I think just one last question.
Okay, one last.
Make it a good one. And of course, we can. You guys can keep asking questions, and we're going to move on to the education part of contributor days. But everybody's on the chat, so feel free to continue conversations there.
Okay, so I think I have a good one. Does the Angular team plan to create its own state management library, such as Redux or Context API?
So in effect, we partially have one. So NgRx is the closest thing to a official one. But for us, it's really important that it not actually be part of Angular, that it be a choice. Because state management, there's a lot of different philosophies. There's lots of different schools of thought of how to do state management. If you like the Redux pattern, NgRx, excuse me, is a great state management, one-directional kind of Redux-like version that exposes observables and fits in really well with Angular. And it's kept up to date with Angular, and it's led by one of the Angular team members. But I don't think we're at a point where that should be part of Angular, because there's a lot of other great approaches. So for example, there's NgXS, there's a whole bunch of other state management solutions out there. And I would say this pattern is still evolving and being adopted by the industry. I mean, not every developer is ready to use NgRx day one, nor does it make sense for them to do that. Feel free to chime in, Igor, too, if you...
I would just add that we are still waiting for a little bit of a consolidation in the ecosystem, especially in the Angular community. Because the thing is that once we adopt one or the other or build our own, we basically take the air out of the ecosystem, and it's going to be very difficult for a third-party solution to be created. And we still see that there is a lot of innovation in this space happening. So we are going to wait a little longer to see which of the approaches receives the most adoption, or we evaluate in different solutions, and we see improvements in NgRx. As Steven mentioned, there are other options. So I think it's just a matter of time, but I don't think that time is yet today.
Maybe tomorrow.
Maybe, right?
So next up, I wanted to go ahead and move on to the education and training section of contributor days. And we have two people who will be representing Angular Bootcamp, and as well Thinkster and Stackblitz. And again, there are so many other amazing education and training people out there. If we don't know you yet, feel free to reach out. Let us know what you're doing. Let the Angular team know what you're doing, because as I think everybody agrees, the community is so open and excited about helping and trying to figure out what we can do better. So I'm going to go ahead and let Bill Odom from Angular Bootcamp take it from here for his presentation.
Thanks, Tracy. Just wanted to say thanks, first of all, for the opportunity to be among a group of people that I really admire and respect. It's an honor to be on the panel. Like Tracy said, I'm Bill Odom with Angular Bootcamp. If you're not familiar with Angular Bootcamp, it's typically 3-day on-site, hands-on, workshop-heavy training in Angular. It's actually provided by Oasis Digital, which is a software development consulting firm. And Angular Bootcamp grew out of their work with software development. Several of their larger clients had excellent success with AngularJS actually is where it started, and then wanted training for their developers. So Oasis was continually being asked to provide, hey, can you come in and teach these 5, 10, 15 people about this amazing framework that you used to build this latest solution. So Angular Bootcamp grew out of that. It's been going on for many, many years now. Like I said, started with AngularJS, and then as soon as Angular 2, what we were still allowed to call it Angular 2 at the time, became a thing, we transitioned to also providing Angular training. Sometimes those training engagements also turn into consulting engagements. It's pretty common for 3 days of training or 5 days of training to turn into training followed by like architectural consulting. So some of the folks that are actually on this call have even participated in some of those things. Lots of instructors. I'm certainly not the only one. A lot of names that you know, both in the community and as part of Oasis Digital. If you know Sani Yusuf, if you know Corey Rowland, if you know Kyle Cordes, Paul Spears, those are some of the folks that actually also work as instructors for Angular Bootcamp. I will say that demand is huge. Just like what Stephen was talking about earlier, as the number of people who are interested in Angular grows, the demand for training grows. I've often joked, and it's not really a joke, that if I had the stamina, I'd be able to do Angular training 30+ days a month, morning, noon, and night, traveling all over the place to do it, primarily in the US, but there's also some international demand. There's lots of folks out there doing training, although we work primarily in the US. We're certainly seeing no sign of a slowdown and definitely growth. We're also beginning to see that growth on more than just the coasts. There's always huge demand on the east and west coast of the U.S., but we're also seeing quite a bit of growth in the Midwest, where Oasis is located and where a lot of us are based. And that's corresponding to some of the shifts that we're seeing in what people are looking for their training. For example, we had all kind of expected that right after Angular 2 was introduced, we would see a huge influx of AngularJS developers who were looking to transition over to Angular 2 and to upgrade existing applications. And that didn't really happen until fairly recently. We're just now beginning to see quite a bit of interest in upgrading. So we're having to shift some of the curriculum emphasis toward people moving from AngularJS over to Angular, whereas previously it was a lot of people coming to Angular as their first exposure to real web development. In terms of overall student demographics, like I said, a lot more activity in the middle of the country as opposed to just the U.S. coasts. And one of the things I'm really happy to see is the number of women in our classes is growing. It's not an explosion yet, but keep hope alive. But there's more than we used to see a year or 2 years ago. There have been several mentions of NgGirls on this meeting, and I wanted to echo that it is an extremely wonderful organization, and I'm happy to have been involved with it a couple of times now. Highly recommend people getting involved as mentors. So several of the folks who do Angular Bootcamp are also involved now, at least tangentially, with working with NgGirls whenever we can. Among our students, the experience level is generally a bit higher than it seems to have been in the past. And what I mean by that is we're seeing folks who have more experience with web development. They don't necessarily come in with deep experience in Angular, even AngularJS as much as we might have thought, but they're more familiar with just web development. For a long time, our Angular classes were filled with people who were back-end developers who, a couple of weeks ago, their manager said, "Hey, Bob, congratulations, you're now a front-end dev. Go figure out what that means." And they would show up in one of our classes never having touched JavaScript, not really understanding the browser or how the DOM works, things like that. That is happening less often than it used to, but it's still pretty common for us to have people show up in class, and we're literally the first exposure they've ever had to web development. They're usually experienced developers of some stripe, but they are not experienced web developers. Along those lines, folks who were involved with Contributor Days last year might remember that one of the big topics of conversation was the on-ramp, getting people actually started using Angular. And it was very painful sometimes. I can say that in the past year, that situation has gotten so much better. And I've got to give a huge shout out to the CLI team, to Hans and Mike and Felipe and the folks involved with that. The CLI is a godsend in our classes, and it is so much more useful for getting people up and running, getting people started. It's not just the default. I mean, it is what we assume that people are going to be using to build their web applications, to build their Angular applications, and it's much, much easier to get people started now. In the rare cases where we can't actually use the CLI where we would like to because of some satanically configured corporate firewall or whatever, Stackblitz is a godsend there. Whenever people have any sort of trouble getting up and running, Stackblitz is the thing that we reach for. And in fact, in some classes, Stackblitz is our default. And it has proven to be so capable and so appealing that as people's first brush with Angular, it's a beautiful experience. I find that people are often so impressed by Stackblitz that it improves their opinion of Angular and of our training. So we try to show it off as much as possible. So huge shout out to Eric and Albert for that. One other thing about the CLI that I like to mention, I said that we have a lot of back-end devs who are brand new to web development. The CLI is useful in another kind of unexpected way. The structure that the CLI provides in terms of the application that it builds by default is a very comfortable thing for back-end developers. They see a structure, they see a directory layout, a kind of philosophy expressed with the CLI that makes them feel much more at home than they ever did under something like AngularJS. Other things to mention. In terms of challenges, like I said, the on-ramp is a lot easier than it used to be. But I will say that as Angular itself has gotten more capable, the challenge in teaching it is not so much, Angular is hard to use. Angular's actually gotten quite a bit easier to use in many cases, but it's bigger. And that's hard to deal with in just 3 days. A lot of times the stuff that's really easy or fast to teach in 3 days is not necessarily what people need to know about 3 months out or 6 months out or a year out. So our challenge that we often face is teaching people just enough Angular so that we can talk to them about the things they need to care about well beyond the class. We sometimes jokingly refer to that as like, day 4 through 1000 of our 3-day class. We try really, really hard for the stuff that we're teaching to be relevant to people, not just in the 3 days that we actually see them, but in the months and the years to come after that. We also try very hard to stay extremely up to date. So tracking the framework as it changes can often be a challenge, not because of code. The Angular team has done a fantastic job of making it very, very easy to upgrade the code base associated with our curriculum. It's more important that we want to stay on top of what, how best practices are changing. Like I said, we want to make sure that what we're teaching is extremely relevant to the people that are in our classes, because they're working for real customers, building real, typically very large applications. And we want to make sure we're expressing to them, here is the way you do that in the real world. So as Angular itself changes and gets better in some cases, at certain kinds of things, we want to make sure that our practices have been updated in order to take advantage of those changes in the framework. And that can be a challenge to stay on top of it. But fortunately, we all enjoy it. Everybody that is an instructor is also a working consultant, a working developer. So we're already doing those things. We just try to make really sure that it's reflected very, very quickly in the curriculum. Things that we're looking forward to, as Angular itself has matured and frankly has earned the trust of the community, through version 2, version 4, version 5, version 6, people have really grown to believe that this is just going to get better, but it's not going to shift out from under me. I can trust that the framework has turned into a platform. So there's an opportunity and a challenge for us to take advantage of the framework as a platform and help people begin to embrace and understand that ecosystem. And again, the challenge is that we've only got 3 days, but we want to make sure we expose people to all the good stuff that's happening on top of that ecosystem. So one of the things we're beginning to offer is beyond the 3 days of training, we want people to be aware of the things that they can do beyond just core Angular and offer ways to help them do those things. So sometimes that comes in the form of extended training, sometimes it comes in the form of consulting. Whatever the case may be, we've kind of got a buffet of topics that once people know enough Angular to understand where they can go with it, we want to be able to help them beyond that point. And that's a lot of fun. That's something that we're really enjoying doing because, again, as much as we enjoy Angular, as much as we like the technology that lives under it, what people are really interested in is building really awesome solutions on top of it. And we want to help them do that. And Angular is beginning to enable that at a whole new level. And frankly, in a way that has kind of been missing in web development in general, because things have changed so rapidly. Clearly getting more powerful day by day, but is also stable and continuing to stabilize. So being able to build on top of that and teach on top of that is super, super useful for us. So that's my update. If you got any questions, fire away.
Thank you so much. So feel free to post questions on chat, and everybody obviously on video, feel free to jump in as well after we have Eric present. So Eric will be talking about, Eric is one of the lovely co-creators of Stackblitz and with Thinkster. So thank you so much, Eric, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hey everyone, it's awesome to be here. So I'm going to switch over to my computer screen because it's a lot more interesting than this. 1 second. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep, you're good to go.
Cool. All right, so my co-creator Albert is not with me at the moment. I think he's probably still in bed sleeping. But Albert and I started this site called Thinkster.io. A lot of you may have run across this over the years. We have a ton of Angular content. You can learn how to. We need to change it to just say Angular, get rid of the two. But we have a ton of Angular content, and we've been doing this for 4 years now, 4 or 5 years now, and we actually kind of stumbled across this other thing we created called Stackblitz because of our work on Thinkster, which is we want to be able to teach people full stack development. And the problem a lot of people had, and this has kind of been mentioned in this call, is that getting a local environment set up can really be a huge pain. So we wanted to just try and get everything to work inside of your web browser so you wouldn't have to install anything. And so that's how Stackblitz came to be. So Stackblitz is basically just like VS Code in your browser, lets you rapidly prototype progressive web apps. So to create a new project, I just click and boom, I have this VS Code IDE pop up and it's going to start our dev server and I now have a live running app, right? In 1 click and 5 seconds later. It comes with all the stuff that you would need in your local environment. It's got VS Code state-of-the-art IntelliSense. So if I start typing stuff, it'll actually give me the recommendations on what I could possibly be typing. That also includes, if I go to my app module, it automatically sucks down all of the type definitions from all of the packages. And so I can start typing into this ng module. It'll tell me an actual property of ng module that I could use here, right? You also notice that it has this really awesome error handling. So when I type something in, this is not valid, it'll yell at me and it'll tell me exactly where that went wrong. I can go and get rid of that and it'll keep working. And so it has hot reloading built in out of the box. I don't have to configure anything. I can just start typing. I can just change this, say hello world, automatically updates. So it's like really cool. And you can instantly be prototyping applications with it. And if you've ever gone to the Angular docs in the past couple months at least, it'll actually, and we can just go there now, all of the docs, or all the live examples in the docs, actually use Stackblitz. So if I go ahead and click on live example here, this actually creates a Stackblitz project on demand. It installs all of the dependencies. The npm installation process is super fast, and we now have a live running app here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go back. And we actually at ngConf, we rolled out this cool new feature called Teleport, and it makes creating progressive web apps like a lot easier. So if you ever want to be building an Angular app for both your phone and your desktop, one of the tricky parts is that there's often incompatibilities between using something on desktop and a mobile with the APIs, or just how the browsers are rendering things. And so what's kind of cool is I'm going to go ahead here and just type in teleport demo. Hopefully that's available. Yep. And so everyone in this call, if you go to teleportdemo.stackblitz.io, you'll be able to actually follow along with me. And this is actually be hot reloading on your browser, on your phone, whatever have you, right, as I'm typing. And we'll see here, once people actually connect, it should work at least. Make sure that people can actually connect here. Okay, so yeah, that should be working. Yeah, so basically what you can do with this is, as you're typing over here, this will actually get hot reloaded onto all of your different devices, and you can actually do debugging across your devices as well. And you can see here right now we have 4 people who are connected live via teleport. And so I can go ahead and maybe I'll change the body's background color to purple or something. So everyone should see that in the comments. Tell me if it's working. It should be working. Change the color to white.
Yep, it's working.
Cool. So I can actually go in and I can actually prompt. I'll ask this person, "What's your name?" So this is console here is actually tied into this person's console over in Belgium, right? So let's see what they say back. Hopefully it's appropriate. Oh, looks like they disconnected. Let me try someone else. Bangkok. Let's try that. Nope, they're not around either. Try anyone who's willing to. There we go. All right. Whoever got that, type in your name. Pedro. All right. And so you can see that one of the people connected to our video cast here actually just typed in their name to a regular old prompt. And so what that looked like to them, I'll go ahead and run it on my own. Is this thing popped up, say Eric, boom. So it makes it really awesome for being able to prototype, around the world. All you have to do is open a link and this thing just works. So Stackblitz makes it really easy for, if you're learning Angular, you're trying to play around with some new stuff. It's great for that. It also is just awesome if you need to hammer out an idea you have or a prototype. What's really awesome about it is that we've made it like super fast on things that usually take a lot of time, like installing npm packages. So if I want to install a package, I'll install this date library called Moment. And you'll see it's yelling at me because I haven't installed this yet. But if I try and use that, Stackblitz is really smart. It says, hey, you don't have this package. Do you want to install it? I'm like, okay, sure. And you'll go ahead and install it, and boom. That's actually coming from Moment, right? And everyone should see that on their own devices now too. So it's like really fast to install packages and actually start prototyping applications and whatever have you. So I think the last thing I want to show, because I think I might be running over my time here, but the last thing I want to show is that we have this really cool integration with GitHub, where any GitHub repo that's an Angular CLI project, you can just add stackblitz.com in front of the URL, and it'll automatically suck it in and run it. And so we have this Angular real-world example app here. So this is like a pretty large application. It's like a clone of medium.com. So I'm just going to add stackblitz.com / and then hit enter. And you'll see that it automatically sucked in the entire repo. It's installing all the dependencies we'll need here. You see this thing's big. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. It's compiling and installing this all on demand. And boom, we have our live medium.com application running right here. So it's super, super, super nice. Just pull it in, and later this summer, you're actually going to be able to commit any changes you make here right back to GitHub as well. So you can actually use Stackblitz and commit straight back to your source of truth on GitHub. So that's all I got for you. I'll go ahead and end my screen sharing here. But yeah, so that's Stackblitz in a nutshell. And happy to answer any questions anyone has about it.
Yeah, definitely a bunch of questions for the lots of wows as well. So yeah, definitely a lot of questions for both Bill and Eric. And again, anybody else, feel free to chime in. I'm wondering which one I should pick. There are so many.
I appreciate that you think there will be lots of questions from me, Tracy. Following
Eric is the hardest thing in the world. All right, well, Bill, then you've motivated me. Okay. Mike said, when you teach, well, you already answered it, but maybe you can answer it for everybody else. When you teach advanced topics, do you cover or suggest or hint at the idea of contributing efforts to open source? And then the other question was, do a lot of people have issues with TypeScript?
Sure.
While you're teaching?
Yeah, like I said, I did drop an answer in the chat, but just for the folks on video. We definitely do talk about the open source nature of Angular and the Angular ecosystem. And to generalize the answer a bit, one of the things that we talk a lot about, certainly in my classes, I know it comes up a lot, is that as awesome as the technology of Angular is, arguably the community is its best feature. And that, this comes from folks like Igor, from folks like Steve, and from folks like Brad, that they really want it to be an inclusive, open community that people can feel very much a part of, participate in. They can be part of this community. Brad's not kidding about the "you can sit with us" on his T-shirt. And we want people to understand, especially like the corporate developers we talk to, who are often just trapped in their cubicles, that this isn't something that some faraway group of people that you've never heard of, that you can't talk to, are delivering to you, and you just have to take it. and use it as best you can. That no, you can actually participate, ask questions, and then to Mike's point, give back. You can contribute things, and that is strongly, strongly encouraged. And you can kind of see people's eyes light up sometimes when we talk about that. They don't expect that sort of thing from the software that they use. It's you know, these are folks that live in the land of Oracle and Microsoft, and it's harder for them to conceptualize that, oh, wait a minute, this is a thing that isn't just foisted upon me. I can actually make a difference in it. I can participate in it, and it's really, really.
I know, did we lose Bill for a second? Okay, there we go. Cool, thanks, Bill. Now a question from Will Huang, who I think is helping run Angular Taiwan. If you guys didn't know about Angular Taiwan, that's coming up in November. But this is for Stackblitz and for Eric. Does Stackblitz plan to implement Angular CLI support that can create components on the fly online?
Yeah, we actually already have it here. I'll switch back to my screen real quick so I can show you it. So it's actually super, this is like got to be the coolest way to run a generator. I know Hans is on the call, so, or maybe he's not. Okay, so I'll get away with saying this. I think this is the coolest way to run the generator. So you just right click on any folder, and you can see here that it shows me this list of things that I can generate with all these little pretty icons. And I just can click on component, and I'll say, okay, I want like a home component, hit enter, and boom. I now have this home component created folder with my HTML TypeScript already created, imported it in the app module automatically for me, so I can actually just use this. So if I say app home, that it says home works, which is what was generated there, right? And so I can also do this for if I want to create a module. I can say like, here's my shared module. I'm going to create a user service. Hit user. I can create, you know, a directive for like authentication. I don't know, right? But automatically, again, it's automatically importing those things that I just created, the user service, the directive in the shared module. Makes it super fast to do prototyping.
Yeah, and I saw also, it's amazing that we have so many amazing contributors and speakers in the live chat who a lot of people are, I've been seeing a lot of people make new friends, and like somebody already said that they wanted to organize NG Girls, which I think is super awesome. One question that Daryl had, well, he said, I want this to be delivered as a PWA, but will Stackblitz support or become a PWA? I don't know remember what I want this to be delivered as a PWA is, but
yeah, so Stackblitz actually does work offline. So not in the sense where you can just like install it as an app and, you know, and then you can just kind of create a project from scratch like that. We're going to add that in. There's nothing technically preventing us. It's just man hours that we'd have to put in to make it kind of end-to-end work well. But if you go offline, that dev server that's actually spinning out your assets, that's actually inside of your a service worker inside of your browser. So if you go offline, you can keep hot reloading, refreshing, changing your code, whatever have you, and it'll keep on working. So all the core technology, all the hard work is being done inside of your browser itself. So making it as a full progressive web app is totally possible and will totally happen probably within the next 4 months, I would say, something like that. But yeah, for sure, that's the dream.
Yeah.
I do not sleep. Not enough.
Yes. JavaScript fatigue. It's real. Okay, so CWAT had a question, maybe to Bill first and then to Eric as well to chime in. As an instructor, what is the most advanced topic in Angular?
We had a short conversation about this in chat. Kind of the, you know, what are the things that people struggle with the most? We often have a lot of people coming in that are dealing with asynchronous programming for real for the first time. Like I said, we often have folks that they're fairly new to web development. So we hit them not only with the concept of asynchronous programming, but then we immediately followed up with observables and RxJS, and that can be overwhelming for some people. Now we've gotten a lot better at teaching it over the last couple of years because it's so fundamental, so core to what Angular does and how it does, and using Angular effectively. So we really enjoy teaching that part, but it can be a challenge. Asynchronous programming in general and observables specifically can be a little tough for people. But I can tell you that once they get over that hurdle, you can tell that they're super excited to start playing with their new tool and really taking advantage of the power that's afforded by that. On top of that, we mentioned state management earlier. It's not really so much a topic for teaching as a topic for warning people about. It would actually be pretty easy for us to teach a 3-day Angular class that would leave people at the end of 3 days thinking, oh, I know Angular now, I am unstoppable, only to find out a week or a month later that they really don't know enough to build real Angular apps. So we try to spend a lot of time also preparing them for the things that they're going to encounter post-class, and not just the next week, but in the year beyond the class, so that we might not be able to teach them this particular topic, but we can at least warn them that it's coming and give them hooks for things to remember, and things to look up, and things to explore, or to come back to us, frankly, and say, okay, I've gotten to this point, and you warned me it was coming. Can you help me through this next part? So state management, NgRx, and the growing ecosystem of state management libraries and techniques are also a big topic. But yeah, observables, and then the things that build on top of observables are probably the ones that are most immediate topics for people.
Eric, have any thoughts?
I think I echo everything Bill's saying. I'm not sure if I have anything more eloquent to add.
Well, I will say that the other difficulty we run into in class is if we show people Stackblitz early, that's all they want to freaking talk about.
That's good. That's good news.
And then I think Stephen, you had a question as well for everyone.
Sure. Yeah. I've talked to a lot of folks who don't even see themselves as being teachers, but they definitely could be. So if someone's thinking about getting started teaching Angular or even considering it, what should they be thinking about?
Well, I mean, you left me open for this, so they should definitely get in touch with us, because like I said, the demand is high for Angular training, and there's only so much time I have to be on planes and in cities that I don't live in. But apart from that, if people are just looking to begin teaching other people, first of all, participate in the opportunities that are already out there to expose yourself to the kinds of problems and questions and levels of experience that people have. We've mentioned NgGirls several times. There is probably no better way to get an idea of what real people who are smart but unfamiliar with what it is that that Angular is about, or maybe even web development is about. No better way to get exposed to that than to go be a mentor at something like NgGirls. Your local community almost certainly has groups of people who want to know about stuff like this, who need to know about stuff like this, and you can go help out. You will be a huge benefit to those folks, and also you will learn as much as they do. If you're looking to get into teaching Angular as part of what you do for a living, then definitely get in touch with folks like those of us at Angular Bootcamp. But there are lots of other really excellent training organizations out there as well. And if they're anything like us, they're swamped. So definitely talk to them. In our case, what we usually do is when people are interested in becoming an instructor, they attend at least one class to start with. And then they assist with one or more classes. So there's several opportunities for them to be exposed to what it looks like to teach, to the particulars of our curriculum, well before they're ever put in front of a class of 10, 15, 20 people on their own. Lots of folks out in the community who have been through this. I mentioned Sonny, Corey, Lance Finney is in chat. He's also one of our instructors. Lots of people who have been through this and are more than willing to share their experiences. So, Stephen, I don't know if that answers your particular question, but I know that matches with my experience.
I think one of the things that's really important to think about when you think about wanting to start anything is, there's people who say they want to start things, and then there's people who actually do. So it's just a matter of doing it. There's been a lot of talk in the chat about, how do I start a meetup? How do I start giving workshops and different things like that? Bill, I love your idea of helping start with NgGirls. Maybe just running an NgGirls workshop, seeing how it goes, and then maybe those are your training wheels to be able to start charging for different workshops. In addition to that, I started JavaScript through just organizing a meetup, so I didn't even know what JavaScript was. well, at least I had very little clue about what JavaScript was until I started organizing a meetup. It went off very successfully, and then I decided to learn it. So things you didn't know. So let's see. Other questions. There are so many great questions. Does, oh my gosh, which one can we pick from? So there's a lot of conversation right now about just how to build communities within the Angular, like join Angular meetups or do Angular meetups and things like that. I would highly recommend actually just looking within your local Angular community to see what Angular meetups are currently in existence. I saw somebody in the Triangle. I'm located in the Triangle, North Carolina. So if you want to help organize Angular RTP, we'd be happy to just, you know, get going and start working together. Daryl had a question about PWA versus VS Code native. Do you think we'll ever be able to ditch the native install?
I mean, I think in certain cases, right? I mean, like basically, we think so at some point, or we hope so. Specifically in the context, I think, of creating progressive web apps. I think that's yeah, I think that's at least going to be the first step. If you're doing backend stuff, you might not be able to leave your local environment. But if you're strictly creating a PWA, turns out it's actually your browser is actually better suited for running that development environment. It can actually run a lot faster because everything stays in memory, and that's what makes Stackblitz so fast. Is that you don't have to hop between FS or whatever. And so we typically see, usually between 3 and 5x speed improvements on most of the stuff we ship. So I think it depends on the context of what you're working on. If like an editor as a PWA would actually replace VS Code on your local machine.
Is anybody who's currently on video part of NG community, or can anybody talk about NG community? Or I don't know if Stephen, you can.
Sure, if no one else wants to chime in. So there is I'll call it a meta community for Angular community organizers run by Maxim Salnikov, where he wants to bring together community organizers so they can share best practices. How do you run a meetup? How do you organize these sorts of things? And it's a very welcome opening community. And then he tries to help promote new communities that are getting up and running with his Twitter account, all those sorts of things. I think they have a website. Apparently, Daryl Brown is saying if you Google NG community, you'll find community organizers. He's got a big Slack group where everyone kind of chats about topics. So there's even communities, which is always a fun level of meta thinking.
It's like Node has a community committee. They call it the ComCom. So maybe we can have an Angular ComCom as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there will be ultimately multiple Angular communities, and then we'll need like the NG ComCom.
Right. Anything else we want to talk about education-wise? Are there any other questions, whether it's in the chat or on video, related to education? Okay, well, very cool. Well, again, there are a ton of different resources out there, a ton of different people who offer Angular trainings that you can find. Stephen, is there a list of people who provide Angular trainings anywhere? Any official list anywhere?
So the closest thing we have to an official list, and it's very incomplete, is on angular.io/resources. And then you can find a bunch of in-person training that you can take, or you can find online classes. And so we try and keep that list up to date. It's on GitHub if you want to add yourself. There's some requirements there, but yeah, that would be one definitely good place to look for that sort of training.
Cool, awesome. And again, for people who are excited about communities and workshops, I mean, this is how typically people, I think, just get into the Angular community, is just by starting. So don't be afraid. I've been seeing a lot in the chat of people wondering about how do you get sponsors, how do you do this, how do you do that? Even if it's at a local coffee shop and you just do a quick, meet up with 5 or 10 people, that is the best way to start a community. So feel free to reach out anytime, and of course, reach out to Maxime or find NG community, and we can figure out that. Another question, actually, this is probably an important one, and the last one we'll do is Sander is wondering, is there any plans for any official Angular certification?
We have, the closest thing we have to a certification is our GDE program, our Google Developer Expert program. There is, I know Pluralsight's working on a certification that might already have launched, so like Pluralsight certified in Angular. I know a bunch of people working on this. I think that's a really interesting space. If you are working on a certification for Angular, let's get in touch.
Cool. I love that. Yes. We're starting to see a lot of this, and as a lot of corporations are adopting, see a lot of certification programs in the JavaScript ecosystem. So it's pretty cool to watch. Okay, so next up, we're going to move to the next portion of our of Angular Contributor Days, and we are going to be moving on to the consulting portion. So there are a ton of people who provide consulting within the community who are all amazing. We weren't able to include everybody, but we just wanted to give everybody sort of like a taste of what's out there in case you are needing help. So I think first off, we'll start off with Jeff Cross, who's representing Nrwl.
Thank you, Tracy. I'll share my screen. I'll run through a few things. So actually, I'll talk about Nrwl, what we're doing, but I'll talk about in the context of what we're seeing. And by the way, I put Minko Gechev's book back here as a advertisement for him that I hope he'll pay me for later. But let me see. Do you see my keynote?
Nope, we see you.
Oh,
and Minko's book.
Oh, sorry. Let me try actually clicking the share button. Yeah, the more time that it's up there, the more Minko will pay me for it. So now you see my screen.
Do you have a slide about Ben Lesh in here?
Oh, I forgot to, but I'll mention him right now. That Ben Lesh is amazing. I had an agreement with Ben that I would include him in every presentation I did for some number of years because we had messed up one of his commits to Angular or something. But I think I've done my duty, so I don't actually have to do it anymore. But I'll talk really quickly since I know Carmen and Tracy are going to cut me off if I go over 5 minutes. So I want to talk about what we're seeing at Nrwl, a little bit about what we're doing with companies, but mostly about the interesting things we're observing with Angular in the enterprise. So at Nrwl, we help enterprise teams do Angular right. We started this company 2 years ago when Victor Safkin and I left the core team at Google to start Nrwl. With the goal of helping enterprise teams do Angular right. This was right after the stable release of Angular, so it was a great time to help teams get started on the right foot. But now we've got a whole bunch of people. I don't even remember everyone's names now. But I want to talk about what we're seeing in enterprise because there's some interesting things that we've seen in the 2 years since Angular 2.0 stable was released. And this is all my anecdotal observations. We talk to certain types of companies, work with a lot of banks, finance, airlines, large enterprise teams. They are probably different from the rest of the community, so take it all with a grain of salt. But we do talk with a lot of teams, and we work with a lot of teams, so it's pretty representative. One is that enterprise is now getting pretty serious about upgrading AngularJS applications, particularly with the end of life. I don't know if they call it end of life, but having the sunset date of AngularJS, now many enterprises are mandating that there's a plan to upgrade from AngularJS apps to Angular. This is one of the things that we've been helping a lot with since we started, is helping teams plan the upgrade and solve some of the big technical challenges, particularly with routing, performance, and just making things work together, and also figuring out how are you going to upgrade component by component, route by route, lots of different ways you could do it. And Angular CLI is on fire. This is something that when we started, most people were managing their own build setup. They had their own Webpack config. But now we've seen that most enterprise teams have moved to Angular CLI instead of managing their own configuration. And the biggest reasons we've seen is that Angular CLI is stable. So it's had several releases where it hasn't changed, things haven't broken a lot. Early on, there were a lot of breaking changes between releases, particularly before 1.0. This build speed, like people moving to Angular CLI, we've seen them managing their Webpack config themselves. It ends up being like twice as slow as if they would just use Angular CLI and trust the way they configure it by default. The configuration is minimal, so you don't have to have the Webpack guy or Webpack gal on the team who their whole job is making sure Webpack is configured correctly and staying up to date.
And Jeff, we're still looking at the title slide, is that right?
No, oops.
Oh,
now you see.
Now we see NgRx.
Must have been in presentation mode. Here, look at. I'll go back to my beautiful slides so you can see all the cool graphics. See, here's my upgrading from AngularJS to Angular. Here's Angular CLI.
So pretty.
So I'll do it. You can ignore the sidebar, so don't look ahead at the slides. So NgRx is now standard. We see almost every team we work with is using it. But enterprise teams are still looking for guidance on how to apply it to their domain models, what are the right mental models for NgRx, and basically, like, how does it relate to what they already know and how can they best leverage it? And that's one of the things we've been helping a lot of teams figure out. So we have some general best practices of how we like to think about NgRx, but then also figuring out with their particular domain, what's the right way to set it up. So enterprise is excited about Angular. When we started Nrwl, a lot of enterprises had doubts, so there was still some risk, and people were wondering if they should put their reputations on Angular. But we're seeing a lot of excitement now, and like Bill had said a few minutes ago, that like people trust Angular now, so they see that it's it's stable. They're not having to spend a sprint upgrading. It's usually a couple hours or a day in most cases, and so people are really excited about how it's evolving. And there's a lot of confidence now in making Angular the enterprise standard. So a lot of teams we work with, they're saying, okay, Angular will be the blessed framework that we standardize our components, our tooling, our infrastructure on Angular. But most teams will say, like, you can still do React, Vue, whatever you'd like, whatever makes sense for your team. But if you want the support from the company, then Angular will be the choice, because you get a lot more benefits if you have a standard. So some of the particular things they're excited about are the static analysis, like catching errors earlier, refactoring more easily, the ability now with Angular CLI to automatically update with the ngupdate command. The community is a big plus, and the fact that enterprise is the primary use case for Angular is a big win. That clients like to know that their needs are what's looked at first. Teams want to move faster, and they don't want to accumulate tech debt. There are two emerging strategies that we've seen to help teams move faster. So one of the problems has been like teams doing their own thing, duplicating code, reinventing the wheel every time they want to do something new. And so one of the main strategies that we're seeing people latch onto is moving into monorepos, where teams will co-locate all their shared things, their shared libraries, many applications, and many teams inside of a single repository. And they also want to standardize on cross-team technology and patterns. And this is one of the big things. This is actually most of our engagements now are focused on how to help teams be effective in a model. What's the strategy to get applications merged together? How can we come to consensus on key technology decisions? And how do we need to change organization and cultural habits to work in this monorepo world? So one of the big things we've developed to help meet these needs or stay ahead of these trends is Nrwl extensions, which is just our open source project on top of Angular CLI that we released in October. And since then, we've seen quite a bit of growth. This is NPM downloads, which is one of the main things we look at just to see how much something's growing. As Stephen mentioned earlier, NPM downloads are every metric is flawed. NPM downloads are particularly flawed because they don't represent the enterprise usage very well, since most enterprise is using something like Artifactory or Nexus, or something that only hits NPM when they're fetching a new version of a library and they cache it internally, so it doesn't actually measure subsequent installs inside their network. But it's a good metric for growth, and we've seen great growth of NX. But really what it is it's a light extension on top of Angular CLI that adds some enterprise goodness to CLI, mainly to support massive monorepos, that can have many teams, many apps, and many libraries in the same workspace. And the main thing it does to enable this is understanding relationships between libraries and apps more clearly, and providing some constraints out of the box on those relationships, as well as giving teams the flexibility to add even more constraints to how their shared code and their applications relate to each other. We also have code generation, formatting, and analysis that we think is good for enterprise. For example, one of the things we do is we let you see the dependencies and how they relate to each other inside of your application, because we have explicit relationships between parts of our application. This may seem trivial or silly, but this is actually useful so that you can understand, if I want to make a big change to one of my libraries, I know exactly who else is going to be affected by it, and I can help understand the effort. But we can also see in a code change, like between 2 revisions on Git, with NX, I can see who is affected by this change, and I can know in my CI environment, I actually programmatically use this information to run only the affected tests, so that I don't have to run the tests for everything with every change, which is something that works at big companies like Google really well. And there's a lot more to NX, and you can check out Nrwl.io/NX to see what it's all about. It's free, open source. We don't make any money off of it, except that most of our business is now based on it. So I hope it's useful to you. And that's it. I think I was under 5 minutes or close to 5 minutes.
Yep, you're good.
Victor would have done it in like half the time because he's a much faster talker than me.
Well, thank you so much. I think next up, we're going to have Andrew present from Rangle.
Hey, everyone. Glad to be here. Really happy that that this event is a thing, and to see so many people online. Thanks to this dot and the organizers to actually getting this up and running. I'll give you a little bit of information about Rangle. If you haven't run into us before, we're a lean, agile digital product enablement company, helping clients realize their front-end projects. We do lots of full project work. We've got a fantastic design and creative department, product folks, Scrum Masters, BQAs, and of course our heritage, which is developers and Angular specifically. So we've been around for 5 years. We started as an AngularJS shop, and that continues to be a core part of our business as we do everything front-end related. So we're in Toronto, Ontario, up in Canada. We're a big believer in the Angular community. We host the Toronto Angular meetup. For those of you in the Toronto area, I just found out our next tentative date is July 26th, so come on out. That's at our offices. We've also been sponsoring NgConf since the start. We really believe in making sure that everybody can enjoy the framework and the good work that the Angular guys have put together. In the beginning days that we went and talked with the team, the core team, and said, hey, how can we help? What can we do? And what they said was, can you help us build the dev tools? So we're the main supporters of Augury. If you haven't run into Augury before, it's an open source debugger tool for Angular projects, mainly runs in Chrome, but I've got some news about that one coming up as well. It can really help you take a look at what's the component structure, be able to manipulate parts of your component and say, okay, well, if I change the value of this output, how does the rest of my application work, and really kind of get into the guts of how your application is working and make you much more productive going forward. So some news on the Augury front. We've got lots of bug fixes that we've been focusing on for the past couple of months, all input through the GitHub community. So focusing mainly on greater stability, as well as fixing, we're seeing some problems with some of the other frameworks and tools that were available. PrimeNG and Redux DevTools were providing some problems. We fixed those. So if you're having issues with that before, come on and check out it again. Open up the DevTools, see if it's working for you. We are also continuing to run user feedback polls. We really love getting the feedback from everybody who's using Augury. We have a dedicated team to keeping it up and running and to really listen to what the community is doing there. I was talking with the guys earlier today. They love getting feedback from everyone. So best way to do that is through GitHub issues. We also have Firefox Augury. So traditionally it was just a Chrome extension. We have an extension for Firefox now just released in beta. So we're looking for feedback on that. And we're also looking for feedback on some possible new features that we're looking to do, such as change detection debugging, ng zone profiling and visualization, Angular performance profiling, isolated component testing, you name it. So if you've got an idea, if you've got a bug, if you're having issues, then please come by the GitHub repo and let us know. From more of a consulting side of things, definitely echoing a lot of what Gechev has been saying from the Angular community and what we're seeing from a look and feel standpoint. I know Bill was chiming in on the chat as well, that he's seeing this from that enterprises really loving Angular applications. And we've worked with lots of clients across many different industries, financial, airline as well, which is kind of funny, retail, you name it, to really move to create that better user experience for their applications, as well as a developer experience to be able to leverage things. So we've done some interesting work with being able to put progressive web applications in place, server-side rendering to make sure that applications are super quick for first paint. Also trying to help out with that part of the community as well. For a little while, we had the Angular SSR package that was kind of helping provide a couple of different ideas for the server-side rendering side of the Angular space. Most of those have been were actually brought back into the fold with version 5, which is great. So. So taking a look at things like that, or even things as far out as using Angular as the front end for your headless CMS, and making a fully dynamic Angular application. So it's really, really fascinating to see how people are taking the what would be maybe considered a traditional Angular application and pushing those boundaries and really seeing how far can we move this framework and continue things around. Again, another theme that came up of state management. We've used a mix of NgRx, which is going full force. We've also seen people look at Angular Redux and using Redux as a state engine, as well as other alternative providers. So it's really fantastic to be able to have that choice in the community around the Angular ecosystem and be able to surface the best ideas. There's lots of people that really want to be able to help, and the Angular community really is the best part of the framework that everybody can leverage.
Cool. Thank you so much, Andrew. And unfortunately, my co-founder, Jay, had to drop off, so he's left me to talk about this dot. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with this dot labs, we do a lot of stuff related to the community. We actually have this dot media and this dot labs separate, but on the lab side, we have a lot of mentors on our team and that we work with within the community. And we position ourselves as a framework agnostic company. So whether it's Polymer, Angular, React, etc., we like to remain sort of unbiased and work with the best of the best, and help our clients based on that. So it's kind of awesome. I love it. I love working with people that I love. I think that's the most important thing. So I'm very fortunate to be able to work with this .labs and do things in the community with this .media. There's sort of two sides of this .lab. So on the technical leadership and staff augmentation side, we do a ton of things related to whether it's open source rallying, open source contributions for people, providing architectural guidance, pair programming as a service. We do open source support contracts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anything you needed related to whether it's hiring somebody full-time and having a bunch of senior developers, or whether it's just a little bit of help on the architectural side, we can provide that. Another part of our business, which I'm very excited about, we started this year, I've been doing it for many, many years myself, is we decided to go into sort of developer relations as a service and marketing. So our team really loves building brands, especially me. I love building brands. So we love helping and teaching companies within, just the general, I think, technology ecosystem, how to be authentic and genuine and build community and help give back to the community in a way that's not, in a way that I think is well received by people. So whether it's providing community feedback, documentation, writing efforts, creating influencer marketing opportunities, etc., we're super happy to help with those things. We've worked with quite a few different clients. Probably one of the most notable is we run community relations for the Node Foundation. And for myself, I'm a Google developer expert, RxJS core team. I help lead the RxJS new docs initiative, which I'm super stoked is finally launched. And I'm happy to help with that. And then one of my other co-founders is Jay Phelps, who was on the RxJS core team, is author of Redux Observable, also a fellow Google developer expert, and really excited about WebAssembly. So we're starting to help clients with WebAssembly efforts as well. In addition to that, I just wanted to share our brand new launched website, which I'm so excited about. Especially because Dima, who'll be presenting next, his team helped us transition this over. So you can look at all the really cool things we do for the community. And again, I love having a job that enables me to just do everything I want for the community. I really believe in bringing the community together. And that's sort of how everybody on the team at this dot thinks about what we do. So this .javascript, we have a lot of amazing events talking about state of browsers, state of WebAssembly, state of accessibility, etc. A lot of amazing speakers that we featured in the past. Contributor days, of course, we're doing Angular right now, but we do plenty of other contributor days. Next week is going to be Vue contributor days, if you're excited about the Vue ecosystem. And you can look at our past events as well. Modern Web, we have local events happening in the Triangle in the Bay Area and an amazing podcast. And of course, Ben Lesh and myself do RX Workshop, where Ben's proceeds from this go to helping underrepresented groups in tech learn how to code. So we donate to different nonprofits every single month. We're also hiring, so feel free to please come and work with us. We're super excited to have you. And then that is about it. So I wanted to go ahead and now introduce Dima, who will be talking about Valor.
Yep, so I'm Dima, Google developer expert, founder of Valor Software, and several UI libraries built on top of Angular. And I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with it, so I will not be repeated. We do a lot of consulting, but mostly we do development, and not only for enterprise clients, but and for small companies and startups and a lot of that things. But it's not the most interesting part of our work. We're trying to help and participate and organize local meetups in Kharkiv. And this year we tried something completely crazy for me, because before I have never organized conferences. This year we do a first Angular conference in Ukraine, which is ngtools.io. And there are a lot of challenges, especially in communicating and organizing all this stuff. But it's incredibly interesting because there was no any Angular conference in Ukraine before, and hopefully this year it will be something amazing. I will be able to bring all my friends from Angular community to my home city and to show how it should look, and that Angular it's about love, and how that we are welcome any other frameworks or folks who work not only on Angular and other things. So in nearest plan, we work on a tool which is really close by idea to Webflow, if you know what it is. If not, it's a really great tool for designers. So, and we are trying to develop a tool which will allow people who are not really familiar with development to get on top of Angular and design their websites and easy to change them. Something really small and simple to get on top of it. Except of that, there are a lot of things which is happening, but that's most probably it.
I think the most amazing thing about everybody who sort of presented, and again, there are a ton of people who do Angular consulting, but and I don't know, I guess I didn't realize this when, we sort of randomly selected a few people, but everybody is so focused on community. And everybody is not just excited about like, hey, we do consulting, but they're much, much more excited and passionate about the projects that they're doing in open source to help bring together the Angular community. So I think that's super awesome. Feel free to post any questions on Slack if anybody has any questions about consulting or anything like that. I don't know if anybody has questions on here about it. I can start off with a few questions. Maybe I'll start off with just an open question to everybody who just presented about that. How did you guys get into Angular or Angular community, or what was the reason to decide to focus on Angular and helping companies with Angular?
I could answer. Well, yeah. So I got started with Angular because I was working on a Node project. It was like a backend as a service open source thing. And Angular was at that time, this is like 2011, Angular was really new. Like I may not have been 1.0 yet. And but like we immediately latched onto it and just integrated with it because it was the data binding, the dependency injection, the testability were things that made it really appealing. So then I convinced Brad to let me work on it full time at Google, and naturally wanting to start a company, I chose Angular because we saw the potential. We saw how much excitement there was for it, and we were pretty big believers in it as the right thing for large companies to build apps at scale.
What about you all, Andrew? Rangle has been very involved in the Angular community from the get-go, as you were mentioning. But yeah, what was the passion and the reasoning behind that?
So most of it was pretty similar to actually what Geoff was saying, and we started off in the Angular 1 days and just really understood that the way that this framework is built and the values that it upholds, again, testability, dependency injection, being able to provide structure to your front-end applications, especially in the Angular 1 days, that was huge. That there were, I don't know how many jQuery apps running around the world that were hard to maintain over the long term, and Angular apps have really shown their ability to provide value for companies long term, not just short term, and be of a high quality and be testable and be that thing behind it. So when the alpha and beta days came out, as a company, we just jumped right on it. We knew, we saw exactly where this was going, and we had clients who wanted to follow right from the beta days all the way on, and they haven't looked back.
Oops, I was muted. Sorry about that. Dima, what about you? How did you get?
So as for me, it was maybe 2011 or 2012 when I had to decide to choose AngularJS or Knockout.js at that moment. And one of the things, except because both have two-way bindings, etc., syntax of the things in Angular was more nicer. Then Mishka was in Kiev, so I had a chance to listen for him and ask him questions. And after that, I am starting converting from .NET developer to JavaScript developer, and I fall in love with design patterns which use in AngularJS under the hood, and I cannot stop it because there was a moment when everybody was screaming around when AngularJS was almost dead and Angular didn't release new version, and I had to wait for quite some time and dive into the pain of alpha versions of Angular, but it's worth of it, and it's still worth to use it because it's best design patterns and a combination of things and ideas inside of the one framework I have not seen such in others, not saying bad things, but it's just personal preference.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I'll tell you how I got involved in Angular. It was a few people, and then finally Jules, who used to be on Angular developer relations, who invited me to my first NGConf 2 years ago, and everybody was so nice. And all of a sudden I had all these friends, and all of a sudden my entire life became Angular for a second, completely by accident. But, you really follow what I think, everybody always talks about the love of the Angular community, but it's weird that, it's what pulls you together, right? It's what pulls you in and gets you excited about working whatever you're working on. So, again, I'm very excited. I think in general, JavaScript, for me personally, I'm excited to just work with people that I really enjoy working with, and people that I feel like are passionate and driven. Stephen, do you have any questions for us?
Sure, I'll jump in with one question. So one of the things I get asked a lot, and I have my answers, but I'd actually love to hear from the community, is how do you justify investing in Angular, whether that's coming from a more traditional backend .NET application or whether that's coming from AngularJS? Like, what do you say to your boss when you feel like there's potential with Angular, but there's other organizational pressures?
I'll tell you my pitch. So my pitch is typically the idea that because Angular is a little bit more opinionated in how they set things up, and there's the CLI, and sort of the file structures are typically the same, and there is a large community around it, it's a lot easier to scale that with teams, right? Like if you can open up an Angular application and you don't have to sit there wondering what on earth somebody, the last developer did, because you know where everything is, and you sort of know what the conventions of the community are supposed to be, or how an Angular app is supposed to be written, then you have a lot less questions about oh my gosh, okay, how did you do X? How did you do Y? What is this thing, this homegrown thing that was written, right? You have much more references online. And again, just as an experienced Angular developer, you sort of know what you're doing from the get-go.
Yeah, same when we talk to teams about it, it's the tooling is the #1 thing that makes it. I mean, there's so many things, but tooling is the biggest win by just virtue of being TypeScript based, and everyone's using TypeScript. Every team we work with anyway is using TypeScript. It'd be silly to do Angular without TypeScript. So the amount of affordances that gives you with the kind of powerful tooling you can build is with Angular CLI being one of the most obvious things, but. The amazing things we can do, like ng update being one of the most recent things that's been added, that you can automatically update your code in your application. That's a pretty big win.
Yeah, and also just the familiarity for certain folks. So to Stephen's point, if I'm a .NET backend developer, and there's still a lot of companies that are going to a decoupled front end architecture with RESTful API services. So not only do you get all of the benefits of Angular, and if I'm a .NET or a Java guy, it'll feel familiar. I can jump right in, but you also get, from an organization perspective, that ability to move fast and bring delight to your customers, and be able to separate the user experience from your data model, and really provide business value, and all of those wonderful things that new web architecture allows you to do. And Angular's got everything in the box to make you successful with that.
Yeah, kind of convincing boss is easy when you're founder of a company. Yes, Tracy. The best thing about Angular, it's consistent, it's complete, and you have everything from the box. Plus, it's always moving web ahead with getting on board new and great technologies. So Angular is always the right choice. So right now we are saying that Angular nearest future vis-a-vis render will become the smallest and the fastest. So don't let me down, Steve.
Yeah, and I love in the chat as well, people are sharing their experiences about what they're seeing in their own communities. So we're seeing comments about what's happening in Poland, for example, and a bunch of other different areas. So keep sharing those, and we love to hear everybody's listening. So we love to hear what everybody else is working on, and just sort of like what you guys see within the community, and probably what can also be helped, right? I think for everybody on this call that has done consulting or that is doing consulting, everyone has sort of tried to figure out what is the open source contribution that we can do to help the ecosystem, right? So a lot of times, as Steven said, it's about third parties who sort of take on the challenge of creating tools for the Angular ecosystem, like Nrwl, Rangle, Valor, and this dot. We've all sort of done that. So, well, any last questions? Cool.
Tracy, not really a question. I did want to mention one thing. You mentioned the community and tool aspect. I did want to give Rangle specifically a shout out about Augury. One of the unexpected uses we found for Augury is in training. We talk so much about the hierarchy of components, for example, in an Angular application. Being able to pull up Augury and show people that live in their app using that utility has been hugely useful in training. And I don't know if that was ever really intended as a use for Augury, but man, it's really useful and we love it. So I just wanted to say thanks for that.
Thanks, Bill. That's I'd never actually thought of that before, and I've done some training, but I'll probably add that in my back pocket now for being able to help people out. That's great.
Steven, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask a quick question of everyone. So as kind of leaders in our space, how do you stay up to date, not just with Angular, but how do you stay up to date with kind of software engineering as it continues to progress and evolve?
I think there was a comment before about not sleeping, wasn't there?
I do it at conferences. I mean, I go to conferences and I just see what's exciting and bright and shiny and what are the things that people are getting excited about, and then start incorporating those things. I think Twitter is a really great way as well, right? Like to sort of keep a pulse. But at the same time, I feel like sometimes when you're exposed to all the new technology, you sort of forget that not everybody is has as much exposure to the new technology as maybe we are able to if we're speaking at conferences.
Yeah, for sure. I know for myself, a lot of it is also taking a look at what other communities are doing. So there's some really great ideas that we can cross-pollinate from, our friends in the React ecosystem, from Vue, from Ember, everybody who is moving in the web space. It's really fascinating to me to see how everybody's trying to get to the same goal in the end, and we often end up converging on approaches that make sense. So always keeping an eye out for, not just what's happening within the Angular space, which is, a full-time job in and of itself, Steven, as you can tell, but, being able to look into the other community folks as well and say, what are you doing? What's the problems you're solving? And how have you done it? And can we apply that to the Angular community as well?
And I'll kind of add this on as we continue to answer the question, just because one of the groups that I always try and reflect on and represent is what I call the silent majority, where a lot of people don't have time or a boss that's willing to let them go to a bunch of conferences or to spend a bunch of times with a bunch of technologies. And so I'm loving these answers, but also if you can also add maybe specifics like, where do you go for your news? What's your first stop? If you could go to one place, that sort of thing too.
Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter.
Twitter. What are people angry about?
Yeah, First Twitter, and then you go to your repository, especially if it's open sourced, and open your issues, and you will find a lot of new things about Angular and issues they have with new versions or new versions with React.js, and so on, so on.
Yeah, that's the other side of it. It's like, one is seeing what's new in the community, but also like being in touch with what the challenges and problems or frustrations are. Being like going outside of the Angular team and actually working with a bunch of companies has been really eye-opening. Like the challenges people are solving or the problems they're up against are much different than I thought they were. Like lots of things I just wouldn't have thought about until we actually got out there and started working with a bunch of companies. So it's been really eye-opening to talk with many companies and see some of the patterns and some of the opportunities for improvement.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But again, pulling back into local community and meetups, because that is something that's a bit of a quick hit. So for those of us working in consulting agencies, we're pretty lucky. We have a group of folks who are thinking about this and churning about it across multiple different problem spaces every day. So not everybody has that kind of style of community around them, and being able to hook into other companies or other people and see what did you do today at work? What problems did you run into? And also not discounting the small things. So, if somebody's having a really hard time with data binding, that's important. That's something to keep an eye on a basics level. And meetups for me were huge in being able to really level up.
Yeah, one comment, this is for Steven specifically, is, by the way, I feel like a bit more activity on the official Angular blog would be very beneficial for the community as well.
I agree. We have like 12 pieces of content that are like in the funnel.
Mm-hmm. So they're working on it, everyone. They're working on it.
And then if there are specifics that you want to see, like questions you want answered by the Angular team in blog format, tell us. I would love, because the only piece of feedback we get is like claps and how many people read the content. So it's very hard to tell if we're hitting too deep, too shallow, interesting to people, etc. So give us feedback. We love to hear. We'd love to help you better.
And then another question from Oliver was, how can you spread or share and transition Angular knowledge and software engineering know-how to new team members? Are there any recommendations for doing that?
So I'll preempt anyone while they think about this just a little bit, because my favorite strategy that I've seen, and this has happened kind of 5 or 6 times now at this point, is like if you're in a company, start a meetup inside your company, right? Like where, depending on the size of your company, I've seen the 5 or 6 groups I talked about, they'll get 50, 60 people from their own company showing up every month to talk about the use of technology. And it kind of creates this pull demand of like, everyone's like, oh, I can just go hang out with these people and learn about this stuff. So that's always really cool to have internal meetups, and like where you don't have to worry about confidentiality. You can talk about the specific problems you have, the specific tools you've built around these sorts of things. So definitely start one or join one if one already exists.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Brian also shouted out pair programming, which I think is fantastic, in the chat. So, even from a smaller team level, pull requests and PR reviews, if that's part of your process. If it isn't, highly recommend it, not only as a quality gate, but as just a way to ask questions. So maybe you've got one guy on your team who's like the Angular guru, and go have everybody read his code and take a look and ask questions about, well, why did you do it this way? Or what is this thing doing? Or any of that. It's a perfect time within the cycle of a team to share knowledge in a bit of a more formal setting. documentation if you get a chance to do it. You know, the Angular IO documents site is fantastic. The guys have done a lot of work on that over the past while. So even if it needs to be an offline resource from, you know, the people who are actually on your team, it's a good one too.
Yeah, just to echo a little bit of what we're just talking about, pair programming is awesome. If people have never tried different forms of group programming like mobbing, it is a fantastic way to disseminate knowledge amongst the team. It's almost like knowledge by osmosis. One of the things that I see a lot of the folks at Oasis doing is this kind of group programming where, you know, 3, 4, 5 people pile into a room with a giant television or more than one with code up on the screen. And, you know, there may be one person typing, one person kind of navigating the process, but everyone is contributing, and more importantly, everybody's learning. And people can go from zero, in this case, Angular knowledge, to a pretty high level of expertise in a shockingly short period of time just by participating in things like that. It's really, really effective. So if that's not something your group or your company does, highly recommend trying it.
Has anyone seen, I've seen this work at one company where it's group code reviews, where you have to have a really good culture for this to work, like blameless, like all trying to move forward, all being very positive and supportive. But even just like reflecting on the code that one person wrote and saying, okay, how should we do this? Like what as a team, what do we think is the best way? What are the concerns we could be taking into account to do better? I was actually really surprised that worked so well.
Yeah, it can be an ego-destroying experience, but it's good overall.
It's also nice because I'm sure that helps people talk nicer to each other. And, you know, it's actually surprising. I pair with a lot of people, and, you know, I have people teach me things, and then I just post them on YouTube, and surprisingly people care, maybe because they like to see the pain and the torture of like learning something new and how hard it is for people, right? Like we're all experts in our own right, but we also don't know a lot of information. So being able to explain something to somebody else actually helps you become a better developer. And I think a lot of times during interviews, you know, that's where people get stuck, right? Like, yeah, I'm a great developer, I'm a senior developer, but then you get an interview and you're trying to explain something and you don't have the words for it. Pair programming really helps you do that.
This has happened to me so many times where someone will like introduce me a new concept or a better way of doing things, and I'm like, I have to tell everyone, and then everyone gives me credit. I'm like, but I didn't come up with this. I'm just sharing it.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Dima.
So from time to time, we gather in groups of how we call hamsters, basically trainees, usually 10 people, and they work for projects, real projects. They start from education, they have 2 months to learn stuff, try stuff, and then they have dedicated mentors. Of course, code reviews, all the things, discussions, retros, how they work together. Usually after 2 months, even people who was not familiar with programming at all became pretty nice developers, and they have a vision and, you know, how it looks and how it should be at the end. It really helps to get them not on board only with Angular, but mostly get on board how it should look like, how it's when you share knowledge, when you can ask questions without afraid to be, you know, hurt your ego or something like that. So it's really a good practice if said correctly.
Well, cool. Well, thank you everybody for presenting on, you know, sort of like the different types of consultancies that are out there. Angular. We're now going to transition into our library authors, but in order to do this, what we'll have to do is basically drop everybody off the call and then have all the library authors join. But at the same time, during this transition, because everybody has been on for about 2 hours now, we're going to take a quick 15-minute break and come back at the 30 mark to start talking about the different library authors. So Compodoc, NativeScript, Clarity, StoryBook, NgRx, Codelyzer will all be presenting, and everybody else will still be on the live chat, so feel free to continue to ask questions there. But besides that, we'll go ahead and do that transition now and meet back in about 15 minutes.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Bye all.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, guys.
See ya.
Brandon.
Hey.
There we go. By the way, I did find Kaneka sausage at a local Publix, and I was very happy about it. So now I have my Kaneka sausage.
Great.
We're still live, right?
Yes, we are. Lance said, "It's Brandon."
Hello, hello.
Hi, Norbert.
How you doing?
Good, good. How are you enjoying so much Angular exposure? Angular.
I like it.
I don't know what it is, but you've been getting a lot of it.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Vincent. Hi, Minko. Good. How are you enjoying so much Angular? Oops, I think you have to press mute, Minko, on your thing. I don't know what it is, but you've been getting
the video,
a lot.
Minko. Mute your YouTube.
I just muted you. You can unmute yourself after.
Otherwise, we'll end up in an infinite loop of Tracy talking and then us helping Minko to mute his YouTube.
Let's see who we're waiting for. We're waiting for Jeremy. Let's see, is Vincent here? There's Vincent. Okay, Vincent.
And Jeremy's here too.
Oh,
hello.
Hi, Jeremy. Hi. And we have Stanimira. Okay. Perfect. Well, so lovely. Welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody had a quick little stretch break. And we're going to move on to the next part of contributor days. And let's go ahead and move on to the library authors. So remember, library authors, if you could set a timer for 5 minutes before you start presenting, that would be lovely so we don't go over. And I'm going to actually hand the floor off to Stanimira first. So Stanimira, go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm part of the NativeScript team, and I'm very happy to announce the NativeScript 4.1 release that went live just today. And although that's a minor version, it actually comes with some great performance improvements and much awaited features, such as the support for Angular 6. And first of all, we have improved the performance for our Android tabs with 50% with just that minor release. We have actually upgraded the version of V8, the JavaScript engine that we're using for Android, to the latest. And the previous version that we were using was a year and a half old. And that's, as you well know, is like a decade for software development. But now we're on the latest version. Another thing that helped a lot is moving to Webpack 4 and taking benefit from all the great features there. And we also enabled a lot of advanced modification options that led to smaller apps and faster startup time. So combining all of that, now we have 50% faster Android apps just with that minor release. Another thing that I want to talk about is a feature that we've been working on for maybe half a year now, even more. And that's the extended support for multiple navigation controllers. It's actually quite a big feature, and it enables a lot of different UI scenarios that are important for the mobile apps. And it really brings NativeScript even closer to the native platforms for developing Android and iOS apps. It's a pretty big feature, and we're glad that we finally shipped that. One final thing for the 4.1 release is the support for unit testing with Angular test beds, and big shout out to 2 of our community members who actually implemented that for us, and they're just great. I think now is the time to thank our community, who is very, very nice, and we have merged a record number of external pull requests in the recent months, and really thank you to all of our community members. It's always very nice to see people dedicating so much of their free time contributing to open source, and especially on a project that you're working on full time. And yeah, that's it. So to summarize, the 4.1 release of NativeScript is now out. We have improved the performance for our Android tabs with 50%. NativeScript is now even more native-like. And also, we merged some pretty cool pull requests from the community. So yeah, I think that's it from me.
Cool. Thank you so much, Stanimira. So again, everybody feel free to post questions. We'll be doing Q&A right after this for Stanimira and NativeScript. Love the stuff that NativeScript has been doing with the Angular team and for the Angular community. Next up, we'll have Jeremy, who's representing Clarity. And Jeremy, I'll let you go ahead and take it over from here. Whoopsies. Let's see. There we go. Jeremy, are you there? You're muted, just in case.
I am coming online.
Yay.
All right. I do have a couple slides, so that will
perfect
enhance the experience for all. Share.
Yep, we can see your share.
Yep, the infinite loop there. So, all right, so my name is Jeremy, and I'm part of the Clarity team at VMware, and we're part of the Angular ecosystem, but we also were born of a set of needs from VMware internally on how we would manage and build our products in a way that would make them functional, useful, and also to work on inefficiencies that exist as well on how we build and reuse code across teams. So before we had Clarity, or a design system, which is what we refer to Clarity as, we really had, this is a tag cloud of some of the most popular code pieces in our repos across different products. And you can see there's a few things like we've got Kendo and Bootstrap and inconsistent. And these are words that came up a lot in a lot of the documentation and comments around code bases. And Clarity comes and sets on top of that muddled mess that we had before with different frameworks and different product lines, choosing a whole different patterns, and tried to bring some sense of consistency across the board. And it does that with a couple of key things. So we have over 100 of our products that utilize Clarity in one way or another. Most of them are using Angular, but even a few use Clarity CSS styling without the Angular piece because they're an older product perhaps that was already built on something else. Or they're moving to Angular, so they're working on that transition at this point. And we have hundreds of members internally as well as externally who contribute. Some are code contributors, some are bug reports and issues. So we have a fairly vibrant set of contributors and members who are involved in the project internally and externally. And I think that's another important thing, is because we have open sourced it, we are larger than just VMware, and we know that other companies as well have also been able to leverage Clarity in various ways for their solutions, and we think that's wonderful. So we had to come up with this. We had these couple problems across VMware. We had a lot of similar problems with everybody doing the same thing, or it took too long to build everybody to rebuild the same, essentially same solution. And so we wanted this design system to come in and provide a lot of that foundation for us. And the key parts is that we have the UX guidelines. We also then have HTML and CSS. So if you're familiar with Bootstrap, that's kind of the same way, where you have a set of CSS styles. There are a couple JavaScript components, but think about it just from the perspective of some CSS framework, maybe Foundation or Bootstrap. And then we also implemented the interactive functionalities as Angular components. So these are the main things that we provide, which is above and beyond just being a component library. We also have the UX guidelines, and we worry about accessibility inherently internally to all those things. So we like to say it's a bit like a Lego brick that you kind of put together the pieces, but you don't have to generate all of the foundational parts yourself. And we work with a lot of our teams internally to figure out to make sure that we have the right components for their use cases. There's a point at which products and anybody building an application would start to use their own stuff. And so we try to give you as much guidance as we can about those core experiences and then let you go off and customize it as you need. I'll move real quick here. We also have a sketch template, which is useful. It's on our website here. That gives you a quick way to design and utilize the Clarity components from a sketch at least. We also, as I mentioned, we have some of our components are HTML and CSS, kind of like button styling. There's Angular components like a data grid or a wizard and modals. And then we have some that actually kind of have both implementations. With Angular's release cycle that was announced at ngConf, and we're very excited about this. We're looking at this every 6 months as a major release, and then a year-long LTS at the end of that release. So we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to release Clarity on the same cycle as Angular, keeping that release tied to that version of Angular so that it's pretty clear. I'm using this version, it matches to this version. So we're trying to fall in line with Angular in lots of ways, including our support and our versioning cycles. We also fall in line with Angular's browser support schedule. So we take a lot of cues since we are built on top of Angular for a lot of these components. Most of our use cases come from Angular applications, so we think it's just best to stay as close to Angular as possible. We also try to work with the Angular team and contribute back in some ways. And we open sourced Clarity about 1.5 years ago, and there's our project here is the GitHub page here. So if you have issues or features, we are very open to working with you. We'll also work with you on adopting the feature and not just waiting for you to design something and submit it. We can talk through it ahead of time so that we make sure everything is covered correctly. If you have general questions, we go to Stack Overflow, and then general contributions, we also have a wiki on that. So that's a real high level of where we're at with Clarity.
Cool, thank you, Jeremy. That was awesome. Next up, we will have Norbert talk about StoryBook.
Alrighty, I'm going to share my screen immediately. And start. Okay, so I'm going to be giving some words about StoryBook because I happen to maintain it for quite a bit. So let's start out with some hypothetical Angular app that you've written, and I'll shove your app a little bit to the side so I can add StoryBook next to it. And that's a key factor. You add StoryBook next to your app, and you then share your components with StoryBook and your app. So your app stays in existence, and your app stays working and using your components. It's just that StoryBook is starting to use your components as well. Well, that begs the question, why would you do such a thing? Well, your app structures your components in such a way that it's in a deeply nested structure, and it's based on routing usually. And this means that it can be a little bit hard to reach certain components. And so StoryBook takes the same components and lays them out flat. And this allows you to get an overview of all the components that are in your code base. Of course, you can navigate your code base, but usually that doesn't really give you a feel on how your component looks. So that's one of the key factors of StoryBook. It allows you to take components and lay them out flat in our StoryBook. But it can give you quite a bit of an advantage during onboarding or during working with your team, because you can get this visual overview of every component that is out there. So StoryBook allows you to see all your components in all of their variants. And this workflow we call the isolated component-driven development. So your component is displayed all alone in some iframe for us. And this just allows you to see if it actually functions without all of the context. So besides having your component in isolation, and you can see in all these variances, we actually have an add-on architecture, so that allows you to add certain functionality to StoryBook yourself. And we provide some pre-packaged or pre-built add-ons as an example, but also these are very useful. So oftentimes your app component kind of dumps down some callbacks or functions that your components are supposed to call for data fetching, for example. So in StoryBook, those functions would probably not be calling data fetching, or, well, they could. You can actually see if those callbacks are actually called inside StoryBook using an add-on. We also allow you to tweak the properties or the data that is flowing into your components at runtime, so you can see how your component reacts at runtime. And as previously demoed, we also support hub module reloading, and we also support you adding new states or new variances of components and hub module reloading those in as well. And part of StoryBook is about documentation. Oops, it's fast there. Part of the StoryBook is documentation. So we are showing your components in some sort of hierarchy. You get to decide this hierarchy for yourself, and we have a fuzzy search. So if you want to search for that button component, all you have to do is type btn, and you got it. And we allow you to add some markdown next to your component, for example, so you can tell a bit of a story around what your component is supposed to do. So I want to really thank the Angular community, because they have clearly been picking up StoryBook, and yeah, it's like in 4 or 5 months' time, we've grown from 0 installs a month to more than 13,000 installs a month. So that is huge, and it is really rewarding as an open source maintainer to see someone pick up the work that you've been working hard on. Yeah, and we are invested to keep growing StoryBook, and so I have a little bit of time to show a little bit of a demo. And so here's a little demo of what StoryBook can look like. And I mentioned could because I'm currently working on theming. So this is the first themed StoryBook that is shown in public. And one of the features that I wanted to show off is that you can go between all sorts of components in different states. And we have this add-on called knobs. And you can just basically type or use any data in here. And you can see that the component in here is just live re-rendered. And it's really fast. So that's what I wanted to show. And the thing that I've implemented recently is that you can get this copy, and then you open up a new tab, and these knobs are preserved. So that's something that I've worked on recently. And now I'm trying to figure out how to stop this cascade. Okay, there we go.
Cool. Thank you so much, Norbert. We're really excited. I know StoryBook is very heavily adopted in the React community.
It is.
And was it 5 months ago you guys released in both Vue and Angular, or?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe 6 months ago we published for Vue, and Angular was the third. And we've recently released Polymer support and Nrwl support, Marco.js support. And I think like this is a common theme for this entire conference. Really, is that this is about community, right? And this is one of our core principles over at StoryBook, that we want to connect these communities together and create a tool that is working for all of them.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your idea about how you feel about community after our conversation. So thanks for presenting. Next up, we have Brandon Roberts, who will be talking about NgRx.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Nope.
Okay.
Not when you click present, so we can see it here.
Okay. Well, I will just present from here then. Okay, so this is our NgRx status update for contributor days. Okay. So just want to go through the updates for NgRx. that come through recently. Talk about the version 6 release, new projects, new team members, and let's take a step at look forward for the future of NgRx. We recently introduced NgRx 6. This was more of a maintenance release of a lot of under the hood changes. We aligned with Angular 6 and we updated to RxJS 6 and also did a refactor of the code base for pipeable operators. And we made a lot of fixes under the hood that I'll talk about later, including like build tooling and things like that. But another part of that is that we're now built with Bazel. Bazel lets you takes care of the build tooling and infrastructure that you need for packaging Angular apps and lets you conform to the Angular package format. And so we were able to remove a lot of the custom scripts that we had for building and packaging NgRx. So a big thank you to Alex Eagle for his help on helping us migrate to Bazel and helping us with fixes along the way. We also improved our Angular CLI integration. It's been talked about a lot already, but Angular CLI and schematics provides infrastructure around your Angular app and also scaffolding. And we've added more integration with the CLI as far as if you're just starting out with NgRx and you want to add it to your project, it's simple as doing ng-add at NgRx store. You can also, if you're currently using version 5 of NgRx, you can do an ng-update NgRx at NgRx store, and it will automatically update all of your packages to the most recent version. So that's something that, like we said, we talked about community, that the community has helped us out with that and able to use that going forward. Next, we'll talk about a couple of new exciting projects for NgRx. The first one being NgRx.io. And NgRx.io will be the official documentation site for NgRx, where we'll have cookbooks, getting started guides, and best practices, and any information that you would need, whether you're a previous user or a new user coming to NgRx. So hopefully this will help out in that area, because it's been something that's been requested for a long time. There's also NgRx Data, and if you are familiar with this, it's a project that was created by John Papa and Ward Bell, and that we are incorporating into the NgRx platform of libraries. And NgRx Data helps you get onboarding quickly with NgRx for using like REST APIs, because those are things you're going to do a lot, and it lets you manage those things quickly without a lot of repetition. We also have new members. If you're familiar with the project, it was started by Rob Wormald, and it's maintained by myself and Mike Ryan and Victor Safkin. And those new members, as I mentioned before, are first John Papa from Microsoft and Ward Bell from IdeaBlade. And that was part of the work that they have done with the NgRx Data project and bringing that in and helping us contribute further. And Tim DeSchreiber, who actually came from the community, started contributing a lot of high quality work. And so we decided to bring him on board to help further support with issues and development. And lastly, we'll take a look ahead to NgRx 7. We're going to add a lot of new features to NgRx 7, new features for store APIs and entity, and also looking forward to things that are happening in Angular 7 that impact NgRx. One of those being the Ivy renderer, and this is going to open up the possibility of us to add more functional reactivity to the framework, since it enables us to do things like higher order components or use custom instructions for rendering and further hooking NgRx into your Angular app. Also, NgRx is more than just state management. We've talked about just being providing reactive libraries for Angular, and moving forward, we're going to get back to that. We've talked about doing things with forms and more with routing. If you're familiar with the NgRx router, that was a project that eventually made it into the framework, and doing more reactive things with components, things that are built on top of NgRx that may just not be state management. And that is the update for NgRx. Of course, you can visit our GitHub repo here. If you want to contribute to the docs, that's great, because we love the docs. And also, if you want to contribute, do code or with issues and things like that, we also always welcome contributions from the community.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, everybody. So awesome to see all the cool things happening with NgRx, and it's amazing that you guys are using Basil. But next up, we have Minko, who is going to talk about Codelyzer.
Hello.
Hello.
So do you see my screen now?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. So in this very short presentation, I want to give you a couple of words about what Codelyzer is and what is its current state. Basically, the Angular team started Angular with the vision that they want to provide a core set of good practices inspired by AngularJS and inspired by all the work with Angular happening to this moment into the form of a style guide, which helps people be more successful with the framework. I had the chance to be part of the style guides team, and I was thinking how we can enforce these best practices even further in an automated way. So I built first a set of TSLint rules, which were Angular specific. But after that, on top of them, on top of the rule walker of TSLint, there was an extension for allowing us to analyze Angular styles and templates. In the same time, we support Codelyzer supports source maps for our templates and styles. So basically, we can write our styles with Sass or basically anything we want to, as well as our templates. So here is basically what Codelyzer is. You get this TSLint extension where Codelyzer is going to be able to provide static analysis for your TypeScript code as well as for your templates. Here you can see that there are some warnings in the inline styles of the inline template of the component. So the initial commit of Codelyzer was 10th of February 2016, and since then we have constant activity on the project. Fortunately, I'm not the only one working on this. I'm going to share a couple of words about the rest of the amazing folks who are contributing. But since then, we have over 30 rules, mainly about templates and styles. We have over 600,000 files on GitHub, which are mentioning, referencing Codelyzer. We have over 400,000 downloads per week, and we are part of Angular CLI. Since recently, Rafael from the Codelyzer team integrated Codelyzer as part of the build system for materials, so we're pretty excited about this. We're also working with some big companies who are integrating Codelyzer as part of their build system in order to simplify the code review process. So for future, we're planning to improve the tooling for external templates even further, because currently, for example, in VS Code, you're not going to see warnings in external templates. That's because of the way we're patching TSLint in order to be able to reuse all the built tooling around it, such as editor extensions. We're planning to add any more rules and more accurate reporting in templates. Hopefully, we're going to have some improvements around this with Ivy around new template parser eventually, where the desugaring of the template syntax is not going to break our logic. So this is the Codelyzer team right now. We started the project together with Preslav, who is on the bottom right. After that, William joined. He implemented a lot of amazing things, such as cyclomatic complexity in templates, for example. And we have Rafael on the bottom left, who is just on fire recently. He did so many amazing contributions. If you want to get involved in the project, you can help us with the documentation. This is something where there is always place for improvement. You can vote for your favorite feature or open a feature request, fix the already existing features if you find issue in them, or implement something new. If you want to implement something new, I would recommend you to first open an issue so we can discuss what you're planning to do, and right after that, we can proceed. Also, if you're just getting started with open source or with compilers, because Codelyzer is heavily inspired by the front end of, is basically a typical front end of a compiler, you just should not hesitate to contact us on Twitter. We would love to help you with that. And here is just a brief slide on our feature request process. Basically, our feature request process is inspired from Lodash because of the overwhelming amount of issues that you can get in an open source project. We're closing all the feature requests and adding what's needed label. So after that, we're able to sort the individual feature requests based on the thumbs up that people have given them. So we're able to prioritize them and include them in our backlog. If you want to know more about Codelyzer, you can find it on codelyzer.com or at GitHub. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much, Minko, and thank you for so much all you do for the community. So next up, we will have Vincent talk about Compodoc.
Hi, everyone. I will share my screen also. Yep. So,
oh, you're cutting out a little bit, but we can see your screen.
Did you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. It's a documentation tool for your Angular project or library. And it was started 2 years ago with Wasim Chegan he started a graph engine CLI for generating a static graph of your models. And after that, to build easily generate documentation. It's just based of HTML static pages, which provides for your users of your library, of your colleagues on your project, in very powerful information. It's like TypeDoc for Angular. And since 2 years, we have added many features for supporting last feature of Angular, features like JSON export, flags for disabling stuff, etc. You see in the demo. You can see the demo website on compodoc.ap, and I will just show you now a little live demo. Did you see it?
Yep, we can see it.
Sorry, I will restart. Okay, so in this demo, it's just a documentation generated from a simple to-do MVC project. And you just have, with Compodoc, very quickly, all the information about your models in your application, all the components, and all the stuff like around the TypeScript, like your classes or interfaces. And after, specific stuff for Angular, like your interceptors or pipes or everything else in your models or for services, for example. And after, for each component, like in other documentation tool, you have all information about the metadata for component, for example, all the properties, methods, and you can easily find information about what APIs you can use in your components, for example. And we have also added recently support for external documentation for each component, for example, or the tree of your DOM or live code of your template, etc. And the goal of this tool is to easily share knowledge of your application, of the code base, and easily find information about what you can do with components. It fits well for libraries or for applications. On the last version, we have refactoring the left module to fix a memory issue we have with a very large code base. And we plan to support on the next months more very large code base by the maybe switching the template engine to something more performant. And we have also plan to refactoring the graph engine we have here, where we can see all the information about the structure and the links between your models, our components, etc., which is right now just a SVG, and we want to refactor it to generate the graph at runtime in the browser. We want to also support Angular 6 with more, for example, checkable providers, and provide also an export of your documentation in a PDF format, for example, and a minimal mode for generating a documentation with the most lightest as possible. That's last dates we have. Maybe next at the end of the year, supporting legacy AngularJS projects also, written in TypeScript or in JavaScript. And we are also working on the TSDoc project of Microsoft, of TypeScript team, to better support GSDoc commands in TypeScript, and having a normal or a standard in TypeScript and for GSDoc commands. I want to thank just quickly all the users and contributors of Compodoc, and people who are submitting issues on the GitHub repository. It's very cool for authors to having feedbacks and easily fixing when we have all the information we need. That's all for me for the updates of Compodoc.
Thank you so much. It's amazing to see what happens within the Angular community, and Steven's totally right. Like nothing, like the Angular community does not scale in one room. So moving on to our Q&A portion of the libraries, lots of things were being shared, really active conversations happening in the chat currently. I see Wasim in there chatting about, and Mike Wren and Brandon talking about NgRx and some questions. So I don't know, Carmen, do you want to start off with any questions?
Yeah, I was currently checking the questions in the chat. I can't really find them, but maybe you'll take up on those. I do however, have a question for all the library authors, and that's, how do you come up with the awesome ideas that you come up with?
I can take an answer on that question. Is that they just keep appearing as GitHub issues, to be honest. And as a StoryBook user myself, I also hit its limitations, and that just makes me want to make it better all the time as well. So those are two ways for me that I know new features coming up. And what definitely helps is that the communities for Vue and React and Angular, they're really different, and so they have different perspective on how things should work. And kind of we're trying to find a nice in-between, or a system where all of their desires can be met. So, someone else want to take it the same question?
Yeah, I'll throw some in there too. I think it's the same thing for us. Some of the things, a lot of things with some of the things with NgRx have come from ideas from the community, and some of them have come just from like building apps with NgRx. And if you're building with it, then you kind of feel some of those same pain points or things that you wish the NgRx had. And some of those things that we have maybe worked on before have come out as projects. Like Entity was a good example of that, of something that, you know, we had kind of used. If building an NgRx app, you kind of fall across, like you come across these same patterns over and over, and putting that into a library where the community as a whole can take advantage of it and contribute to it, I think is a great example of features that kind of come organically and help to grow the, you know, things that you can offer to the rest of the community. So
yeah, I completely agree. Basically, we face issues, we face problems in our development process, and we want to fix them by writing code. So that's how we come up with nice tools which are helping us with this.
So for somebody who has never done this before, would there be like one piece of advice that you would give on how to get started with maintaining such an open source project, for instance?
I'll jump in on that. For me, it started out. It started out on GitHub for me. Working on GitHub, helping users. You learn what the things that people want are by things that they request, and GitHub was a good place for that. Places like support channels, like even like the Gitter, before I started doing NgRx, like the Gitter Angular channel. A lot of people hang out there that you know, ask for things, and helping them there. And I would say another big part of that is the docs. That's usually like the lowest barrier to entry to contributing to a project, right? Because usually, like even these days, like on GitHub, you can go on GitHub, you can click the little pencil, you can edit docs right there, and you know, you can get started and contribute that way, and it gives you a little more confidence, you know, if that PR, you know, gets accepted, of course, and get merged in. And, you know, docs are the things that all people are always looking for contributors for, that are, like I said, easy to jump into and get involved with. So that would be my piece of advice.
But I think the funny thing is, you know, it's the easiest and it's also the most important, and sometimes the most appreciated. So do not underestimate, you know, when you say like docs are easy, don't underestimate how important and how like crucial your contributions are with the documentation.
Yeah, can I add something? So basically I see two different paths. One of them is contributing to already existing projects, which is amazing, of course, and docs is a great way to start, as Brennan mentioned. And the other one is just to solve a problem, just to try to automate your development process a little bit, to just solve a little problem in order to make your development process more efficient, and share this with everyone. It can be in the form of like a tool or even an article or both. So that's pretty fun. That's what I enjoy doing in my spare time.
I think
I would.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I would add that in a lot of cases, you've got an idea, if it's something new, and you just need to kind of prove it out. It doesn't have to be at the beginning full-blown perfect code. You know, it doesn't have to scale out to millions of apps just yet. Get the idea kind of proven out and start there, and get other people interested in the idea. At that point, when someone else says, "Hey, this is great, I'm going to start using it," or they engage with you in some way, then things start to happen and you get rolling with it. Otherwise, you might spend months and months trying to build the perfect thing, and then nobody wants it, or you know, it's not quite what they want, and so you could waste a lot of energy cycling through something. So perfect is the enemy of good sometimes.
Yeah, I want to +1 on that. it's like creating perfect code, which a lot of people want to do and is actually quite a bit of fun, but can take a lot of time. And a large chunk of success and open source software success in that is actually not just perfect code. It is indeed also documentation, and it's also marketing, and it's also creating a community. Once again, and those are like the lessons that I had to learn as well, starting to maintain StoryBook. Even though once I started maintaining it, it was already quite popular, but we did like from 0 maintainers to 60 maintainers over the last year. And we took it from 6,000 GitHub stars to, I think, like 23,000 GitHub stars today. So yeah, those are the lessons that I learned. Marketing, it's important.
There's actually a question for you regarding StoryBook. So the question is if you're planning schematics for StoryBook, and would that be part of a core lib or a separate project?
Well, we have a monolithic repository at StoryBook, so whether it's in core or not, it is a really good chance of it being in the monorepo. And I think the answer is yes, if I can find someone knowledgeable about who's basically there, who wants to drive it, then I'm usually in most changes in StoryBook. I'm like the co-driver or the navigator. And so when I find someone who is willing to sit behind the wheel besides me, then it's full on, let's go. So the question right back at you is, yeah, sure, when are we doing this thing?
Yeah, fair enough.
I think that's like the biggest thing, you know. A lot of times I see, I think as developers, you know, you see a problem or you see something that you don't like and you're like, why doesn't this work? And then you want to go and create your own to make it better. So I think a lot of, and I think the difference between open source and just improving your life is people go and share what they've created for themselves. When it becomes an open source project that's beneficial to others, that benefits from additional contributions. Let's see, other questions. So I don't know, Stephen, do you have any?
No, I've just been loving the conversation.
Yeah, I think this part was probably the most interesting conversation because all of you library authors have, you know, done open source, been a part of it, and you know, again, going back to the idea of docs. Even Adi Osmani, when him and I were speaking, he's like, "Yeah, I got started with a doc." So you hear that, and you know, it's actually fact. So help contribute.
I think the author of Compodoc and me should probably have a chat at some point. It seems there's quite a bit of an overlap, and yeah, it would be nice to see some sort of collaboration going on.
Yes, Norbert. Yeah, we are now focusing on developers code base, very focusing on Angular. Yes, it could be a very cool idea to mix the code base and documentation of code and having UI documentation also in the same documentation. I don't know. Maybe we can discuss. Maybe it will be too difficult to people to understand what is related to UI, or maybe just code base, but maybe it's just a mix of UI and specific stuff around that. And if we have the same code base and we are running the tool, or maybe the two on the same code base, yes, we can have, for me, very good ideas or features for all the stuff of StoryBook or Compodoc.
open source magic happening live here in front of us. I will also say that we're exploring ways of, for example, using the same annotations that Compodoc uses to spin up prototyping tools for designers.
Yeah, and Sander also said, you know, another thing you can do in terms of helping with contributions to these different libraries and to Angular itself is file issues that you see come along. So a good issue comes with a sample and an expectation of what goes wrong, or a minimal reproduction works the best. So like definitely as you're trying to help and solve issues or file bugs in these different libraries, you know, make sure that you're pointing things out very specifically, because most people don't have time to like sit and wade through a bunch of code to try to figure out what on earth is going on.
Yes, I have a, maybe I can explain a little. For us, for Compodoc, we are dealing with files and a code base. So yes, the first question I ask on the GitHub issue is, can I have a sample code base of the file where it breaks, etc., to easily debugging the stuff, because we are working with the AST file, and if we don't have the source code, sometimes people cannot share on GitHub, so we find another way to discuss online on chat one-to-one, but the first thing we need is feedbacks, the most feedbacks we can have in the issue to easily fix it as quick as possible.
Even for clarity, I mean, we have teams internally at VMware using it. We still ask them to make a Stackblitz example with their issue and submit a GitHub issue for it, because we work out in the open, even if it's an internal project. We don't go digging through their code base. So the issues that get solved quickly are the ones that have good reproductions, or at least enough detail to get going. The ones that don't get solved quickly, we have to go back and forth with them, and it can be very frustrating for everybody, because it's hard to know what you did. And sometimes it's on the application side and not the library. Sometimes it's the library, and it can be very challenging to isolate that. So the better the example, the better the result. And the faster usually it'll get solved.
Yeah, I want to give a quick plug for GitHub issue templates. We've recently added these to the NgRx project, and it gives you a way to easily separate which types of issues a user is going to file. So if it's like a bug or a feature, or even a documentation request, or just general support, it gives you a nice way, a more wizard-like way to send users down the right path of what information we need from them when they want to file a new issue or submit a new feature. So I've seen them going around or added to more repos, and I think they're really valuable to do. So just want to give a quick plug for those.
Yes, I just another cool stuff I have seen. Maybe it's in Ionic GitHub repository. It's just they configure a bot to answer very quickly to just open issue, or just starting to add automatic labels on the issue to make triage, etc. very automatically, and don't lose time on that. Just adding that, it will be a cool stuff for every project.
Can I ask a question to the other library maintainers?
Of course.
So at which point, or what sort of criteria do you have for onboarding other contributors / maintainers, and at which point do you actually like give them administrator rights over your repository?
That is such a good question. And then the other question is, when do you take it away?
Well, taking rights away is also always kind of like hard, right? So, but I guess when someone is just inactive, then they shouldn't really mind, I guess. But I see no harm, no foul. But all right, that's the first question. I would love to hear someone else's answers on how they do it, because I have a particular way of doing it and it's working out. But I love other people's opinions.
So my way of doing it is strongly project dependent. First, I see. We work together for a couple of weeks, and if our visions align, because that's the most important thing, to have alignment in the visions, and also it depends on the project's needs. If I don't have enough time to spend on this project, probably my criteria might be a little bit lower for giving administrative permissions, but they usually are not. So if our visions align, then I think that's pretty much a good way to, a good indicator that this person is going to provide valuable contributions.
Cool. Well, any last questions? I think we're just about wrapping up for the day. I really want to, any last questions? I don't think so. So yeah, so thank you so much for everybody who was in the chat, the different contributors from the Angular community that joined and made everybody feel so welcome. Thank you so much for being a part of that. We wish that Google Hangouts was a little bit more open in terms of having more people on chat, or sorry, not on chat, but on video. And thank you so much to the different speakers and all of you who have done this. I'm so happy to have been able to work with Stephen and the Angular team to just sort of help bring the community together and do something where we can show the rest of the JavaScript ecosystem, set an example of, you know, how we should be as a community. And I think the Angular community does a really, really good job at setting those examples. It's great to see all the different new releases that are happening within that, and talk about different things like education and consulting. Stephen, do you have any last words?
Yeah, and I also want to thank everyone that's watching this, because whether you know it or not, you're part of our community, and we definitely hope we've shown models and examples of how you can kind of grow your contributions, grow your involvement in the community, and you've hopefully seen some of the benefits that you get from doing that. So hopefully next year we find a technology where we can get 1,000 contributors in and all collaborating and working together. I know that's not possible, but that would be really cool.
Yeah, it's always my favorite, though, to see what happens after these contributor days, because something awesome always happens. I definitely see a lot more NgCurls being hosted and a lot more meetups being run, but hopefully these different library authors as well start seeing some great contributions in your different libraries too. So cool. Sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
For always bringing the community together.
Yes. Thank you for letting me to do so too. So you can follow the conversation still on Twitter, twitter.com/this.media, or at Angular on Angular. You can probably find us all online as well. If you Google, everybody's name is listed in the show notes as well. So again, feel free to reach out to these different people. And if you're watching this and you're wondering how to get be involved in the Angular community, just know that we fully welcome you with open arms to do amazing things with us. So thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you on the next contributor days.
Thank you for hosting, Tracy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.